Chapter 422. No one would dare to grab them if these spiritual arteries didn't have enough strength. That was because these spiritual arteries were often deeply ingrained in the earth, and slight carelessness might invoke the earth's rebound. However, one could still try to cut off a small portion of it. Yi Shiwen soon discovered that he couldn't move the grounded spiritual arteries. It was as if these spiritual arteries had been locked up by someone. Moreover, these weren't merely spiritual arteries, but dragon arteries that had been locked underground. Yi Shiwen performed soul search by sweeping down his divine sense to explore the underground. He saw that a thick and sturdy dragon's vein was locked inside the ground by a matrix formation. So, it was very difficult to move it. Yi Shiwen was in a state of shock. A dragon's vein was more like the source of the spiritual arteries. Even a force such as the Yi Yuan school didn't possess dragon vein. In fact, a force wouldn't even be able to restrict a dragon's vein if they were to somehow obtain it. What could one possibly speak of capturing one and keeping it locked up underground? The dragon's vein didn't possess spiritual wisdom. It didn't have the capability to think and comprehend either. However, it possessed spiritual intelligence and instincts, the likes of which an average person simply couldn't match. Yi Shiwen, this place seems to be extraordinary. There must be a big problem here, Yemo cautioned. Dragon's vein was definitely an incredible thing. It could make a super big school flourish. Everything would flourish in the vicinity of its placement. The vegetation would become lush. The spirit fruits would start to grow. Moreover, the demon beasts in the vicinity would become intelligent and extraordinary. Even the human beings born in a place like that would possess outstanding innate talent. These were some of the advantages of the dragon's vein. However, this dragon's vein had been locked up, and only a little of its spirit energy was leaking out to nourish the azure blood rice. So, where did the remaining energy go? It was hard to say which almighty had senselessly used the dragon's vein to support such a small amount of azure blood rice. No one would trap the dragon's vein under such a mediocre place if not for the azure blood rice. Yemo sighed with emotion and said. Yi Shiwen sighed with emotion as well. A dragon's vein had died in the past, and it had left behind the dragon's essence, and a club for people to fight over. However, this dragon's vein was locked underground. Yi Shiwen was spellbounded as he explored this place with his divine sense. He walked in the direction of the point that was leaking out the spirit energy from the dragon's vein. And he was surprised to find that it had led to that Liger dragon's lair. He walked along the lair, and arrived at an extremely strange and precipitous cave. And he found that the spirit energy had become thicker in the depths of the cave. It looked average and normal from outside, but it was like an abode of immortals on the inside. It wasn't surprising that the Liger dragon was so protective of this place. That's why it didn't leave this place. In fact, it hadn't even dared to damage the weeds present at the entrance of the lair. Perhaps it was afraid of this place being discovered by other entities. Bang! It wasn't clear how far Yi Shiwen had walked when he knocked against a transparent strong barrier. Buried earth sword! A sword intention suddenly bubbled out of Yi Shiwen's hand. It swept out towards the barrier to break it. Bang! Yi Shiwen's sword intention struck the barrier, but couldn't break it. This barrier was very hard, far beyond his imagination. It was very difficult to break this barrier. So, what kind of stuff would be present behind it? There could possibly be some extraordinary stuff, and it may have been left behind by that almighty who had locked up the dragon's vein. Yi Shiwen became excited with anticipation. The dragon's vein didn't possess the spiritual wisdom. However, it possessed instincts. So, it could easily rip apart a great sage realm expert if the same was caught off guard. Moreover, some treasure had been left behind this barrier by a powerful person, a person so powerful that he hadn't only grabbed this dragon's vein, but had also managed to lock it up. How could this treasure be lowly? It might be possible that this almighty person had left behind this cave mansion. What should we do about this barrier? I struck it with the entirety of my strength, but it still didn't break, Yi Shiwen said. The entire cave was dark. However, he could see anything as long as there was any trace of light. Therefore, he brightened the cave to his eyes with the help of his martial power. Yi Shiwen saw the barrier before him. It looked like a purple-colored wall. There's still a way. I know a mnemonic chant. I will pass it to you. And then, you will be able to break this barrier, Yemo said. Moreover, this barrier has already sustained some cracks. So, it won't be difficult to break it open as long as we have the appropriate method. Yi Shiwen was surprised to see that the entire barrier was densely covered with marks and lines. They must have appeared on its surface after being attacked countless times. Yi Shiwen assumed that this must have been done by that liger dragon. He speculated that the liger dragon didn't know countless secrets that a freak like Emo did. However, it must have guessed that there could possibly be some precious treasures on the other side of the barrier. So, it may have tried different methods to break the barrier. That's why this solid barrier was densely covered with marks. Moreover, it was clear that it had tried for more than 1 or 2 days. In fact, it must have tried to break this barrier for more than 10 or even 20 years. Yi Shiwen had initially anticipated that this liger dragon had settled at this place for that azure blood rice. However, now it seemed more probable that it had done so because of this cave. Yemo spoke up and read out a secret technique. Yi Shiwen memorized it and began to deduce it inside his mysterious space. Yi Shiwen perfected this secret technique and became exceptionally proficient at it after he had burned hundreds of primary spirit dawn. In fact, this kind of barrier opening technique wasn't rare. It could be found everywhere. And everyone could learn this skill. After all, who would dare to say that they wouldn't come across such fortuitous encounters in their lifetime? So, people would often learn an appropriate barrier opening technique at the time they learned to make matrix formations. However, there were subtle differences between the techniques taught by different clans. The barrier looked ordinary from the outset. However, it was mostly reflecting the depth of this place's background. Ordinary random cultivators could also hit the jackpot and obtain an exceptionally good power technique. However, theirs wouldn't be as detailed as the barrier present here. A higher number of details in the barrier reflected that it protected a place with a deeper background. The true Martial University also had its own version of the secret hand techniques to solve matrix formations. Yi Shiwen had naturally learned it. He had learnt one in Yuan school as well. The Yuan school's technique was obviously far inferior to the true martial universities. Moreover, he was a core disciple. So, he had received high-level attention as a Heaven's Pride level expert. The secret hand technique that he had learnt wasn't an ordinary technique. In fact, it was far superior to the one the other disciples of the true martial university had learnt. However, the technique that Yemo had just taught him was far superior and sophisticated to the true martial universities. Therefore, Yi Shiwen sat cross-legged in front of the barrier. And he was determined to break it. Time passed gradually. And a total of 10 days passed in an instant. Bang! A big explosion occurred. And endless energy waves swept out. Yi Shiwen's clothes started to blow and make fluttering sounds. Yi Shiwen was troubled for 10 days, but he had finally made the barrier to disappear. He opened his eyes, and suddenly jumped with joy. Fortunately, Yemo had taught him the secret hand technique. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to break it even if he had tried for an indefinite amount of time. It wasn't the treasure house that Yi Shiwen had initially imagined it to be. Rather, it was a cave mansion. It had a stone chair and a stone bed. In fact, it appeared like a small bedroom. There were traces of someone's presence inside this abode. Yi Shiwen made a speculation. It was probably a restricted practice area of some great powerhouse. These stones are obviously more than 100,000 years old. In fact, this place belongs to a timeline that came to happen long before that wind dragon occupied this planet. I suppose that this planet isn't the lair of the wind dragon. It may be an abode of some almighty being. And this is the restricted place where he must have undergone closed-door training. In short, it is quite marvelous. Yemo heaved a sigh and spoke. Yi Shiwen got secretly speechless. This entire situation would become even more complicated if this was genuinely an abode of some almighty. In fact, this would perhaps draw a higher number of experts. And it would particularly draw the human experts. Yi Shiwen thought about the tangled and complicated scene when those forces would arrive here like storms. This gave him a slight headache. What's this? Yi Shiwen saw a dark-colored and oval-shaped seed that was kept on the table. This seed was covered in a mysterious light, and lay quietly on the table. Yi Shiwen felt somewhat strange. He swept out his divine sense inside the cave mansion. He couldn't find any other things. It might have been a restricted abode. But it was probably just a place to perform training. The owner must have sealed it off before they had left. However, the seed on top of the table had caught his attention. This seed was protected inside a layer of mysterious light, but Yi Shiwen could tell that it still had vitality. He was extremely amazed by this. One must know that this abode had been abandoned a very, very long time ago. And even if this seed had been here since the time that Wind Dragon had occupied this planet, then it would effectively mean that it had been here for more than 10,000 years. What kind of a seed could survive for such a long time? This is an extraordinary seed. However, I have no clue what it is. Yemo came out from the heavenly source mirror. He carefully examined it for some time. However, he couldn't determine the origin of this seed. However, he was certain that it was an extraordinary seed. He picked up the seed and examined it for a long time. But he still didn't have a clue of what it really was. He had already been promoted to a sage tool. So, he could condense himself as a solid entity instead of the phantom form he had earlier been in. This was a huge progress. However, this was just the beginning. He would be able to practice in the future by being able to treat the heaven source mirror as his main body. And his practice speed would obviously be extremely quick. He would advance by leaps and bounds without any problems. He would become a dreaded expert as long as he could mobilize the power of the heavenly source mirror. In fact, the prospect of becoming a spirit cultivator wasn't a problem for him. He often used to think of this possibility in the past. However, he hadn't anticipated that he would land in Yi Shiwen's hands at that time. And now he couldn't run away after having fallen into Yi Shiwen's hands. However, he and Yi Shiwen had come to get along very well over these many years. And his initial sad mood had also disappeared gradually. However, you can still cultivate it since its vitality is persevered inside the mysterious light. Give this and the Azura blood rice to me. I will cultivate them. I can't determine the origin of this seed at the moment. However, I should be able to determine it once it sprouts. Yemo spoke quite confidently. Okay. Yi Shiwen nodded. But we can't even move this underground dragon's vein. So, how will we cultivate the Azura blood rice? Yi Shiwen felt jealous by looking at the Azura blood rice. These things didn't show instant results. But its effects would be immense if consumed over the years. So, he wasn't willing to give up on it so easily. Nothing can be done now. We can only use the primary spirit dawn for now. The cultivation of this rice will someday expand once we obtain 1 or 2 spiritual arteries. To be continued. Chapter 423. The human experts, demon beasts, and the star beast experts had arrived on this huge planet. And they had set off a scene of bloodbath in all directions. Countless news spread out that numerous experts had arrived, and were roaming about the planet. Countless experts would wage war in every 3 or 5 days. A reckless expert had stolen the Subdragon King's egg a few days ago. He had then fled. The Subdragon King had recently given birth to this dragon egg. So, this theft caused a huge sensation. And the Dragon King led its grandiose army of subdragons, and killed that human expert, as well as the experts of the other forces. This gave rise to complete chaos. The dragon egg was eventually taken back. However, this was only the prologue, nothing more. Bloodbath could be seen everywhere along with the arrival of more and more experts on this huge planet. And the discovery of that ancient Almighty's palace had further triggered countless more speculations. It is said that this palace has existed since countless years. In fact, it was here even before that Wind Dragon occupied this planet and built its lair. So, there was now news about the palace of the Almighty in addition to the Wind Dragon's lair. Therefore, more and more people were unable to sit idle, and they arrived one after another to reap the benefits. It appeared as if someone was deliberately instigating such rumors. And battles broke out everywhere, and at all times. The initial bloodbath gradually transformed into utter chaos. And everyone was left to feel insecure in this situation. 1 year's time quietly passed by amidst this slaughter. Some people died, while many displayed their talents in this 1 year's time. The reputations of several experts of the younger generation had also risen in this series of battles. Peng Yangbo, whom Yi Shiwen had tidied up quite miserably, was one among such experts. It was reported that someone had seen him slaughter a star beast that had already entered the late stage of the semi-sage realm countless years ago. Moreover, that star beast had condensed 999 Tao principles. So, his reputation had come to spread throughout the huge planet after that incident. Countless people praised him. They thought that the top position in the younger generation would definitely belong to him if he continued to practice. He had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Yi Shiwen 1 year ago. However, people interpreted it saying that his age wasn't enough at the time. They said that Yi Shiwen had taken an unfair advantage of his young age, and had bullied the weak child. Yi Shiwen wouldn't be his match if they were of the same age. He would have killed Yi Shiwen with the flick of one finger. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but laugh at this. Other people had always taken an unfair advantage of his young age to bully him in the past. However, the situation had changed completely in this instance, since he was being blamed for taking the unfair advantage to bully someone younger. But he genuinely found it amusing. Peng Yangbo's cultivation speed was abnormally quick. Looking from the talent point of view, people could see that Yi Shiwen wasn't above him. However, age couldn't decide anything. The future journey was quite long. Why would everyone continue to practice if everything could be decided at an early age? Yi Shiwen hadn't stepped out of the closed-door training for most of the last 1 year's time. He had comprehended for some time. And then, he had gone out and killed some sub-dragons. In fact, he had collected 10 drops of the real dragon's blood so far. He had collected enough to help increase his lifespan by 100 years. Several group of experts had arrived here because of the Azura blood rice, but they had been killed by Yi Shiwen. He hadn't seized the Azura blood rice in its entirety. He had left half of it to grow outside. And some people had arrived here to spy on it. However, many people had gradually understood that an outstanding expert was present here. Therefore, the ordinary experts didn't dare to come near this place. Yi Shiwen had comprehended, deduced, and perfected his observing person scripture in the last more than a year's time. The observing person scripture was his base. Therefore, he must improve it to a significant level. Moreover, the small universe had operated unceasingly inside his body. The situation was getting more and more chaotic. But Yi Shiwen didn't wish to get involved in this mess. The martial arts competition between the 4 forces was close at hand. So, he must try hard for this competition. He would come again on this huge planet sooner or later to obtain more treasures. Moreover, that dragon's vein, which had been locked up inside the ground, was a priceless treasure. However, Yi Shiwen could also smell some conspiracy brewing. And he could tell that this chaos would arrive again on this planet after a few years. So, it was quite possible that the truth would come to light as well. Therefore, he would get plenty of opportunities to participate in that major drama at that time. This over a year's time had turned out to be quite productive for Yi Shiwen. 1 year was nothing for the experts who had very long lifespans. However, it could be considered as a groundbreaking period for laying foundation for Yi Shiwen's journey on the road of martial arts. Yi Shiwen had finally condensed 999 Tao principles inside his body during this time. It was far more than an average person could. His fighting strength had also advanced, and had reached the peak of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. In fact, it was merely one step away from entering the sage realm. Yi Shiwen's foundation had stabilized over the course of this time. It had made a huge progress, and had reached a high level because the place where he had been practicing was like a treasure since a dragon's vein was locked up underground. It looked mediocre from outside. However, the spirit energy it leaked had filled the cave mansion. And Yi Shiwen was trying to make a breakthrough to 1,000 Tao principles inside this treasure trove. An average person could only condense 999 Tao principles at the most. This was the limit. And many people couldn't even achieve this amount. Only those experts who had managed to level up to the Great Complete Realm with half-step legendary realm could condense 999 Tao principles. As for 1,000 Tao principles, it was impossible to condense 1,000 Tao principles. This scenario only existed in fairy tales. However, Yi Shiwen didn't feel that his body had reached its limit. So, Yi Mo suggested him to attempt a breakthrough to 1,000 Tao principles. And his cultivation would obtain enormous benefits in the future if he could really do so. He had just set foot on the threshold when it came to the aspect of his future cultivation. And he would be able to advance smoothly in the future if he were to have a more reliable and solid foundation. Yi Shiwen went into a deep level of comprehension. He could enter such a state anytime and anywhere with the help of his mysterious space as long as he had enough spirit energy. So, it wasn't a difficult thing for him. Rings of light began to revolve around Yi Shiwen's body. These mysterious rays of light were dazzling enough to intoxicate anyone. Time passed day by day. A huge sensation had aroused in the outside world while Yi Shiwen was trying hard to make a breakthrough to 1,000 Tao principles. Someone had seen an enlightened mind ancient trees on top of a mountain. So, the experts present on this huge planet seethed with excitement when they heard of this. The so-called cultivation was external as well internal. The external cultivation involved the practice of martial arts techniques. And the internal cultivation involved cultivating one's own mind. The experts often gave importance to cultivating their mental state. The mental state and martial arts techniques are different. The martial art techniques require step-by-step practice. However, the mental state might not require that. In fact, the mental state of an old roadside sweeper could be more profound than that of a legendary expert. So, it was quite difficult to say. One's realm couldn't decide one's mental state. However, it was very important. An expert couldn't control his strength if he didn't have the sufficient realm to support that. Yi Shiwen could display as well as control the strength of the late stage of the semi-sage realm even though he was at the initial stage of semi-sage realm. In fact, his strength had already reached the peak of semi-sage realm. Yet he didn't dare to promote his strength to the sage realm since his current realm hadn't made a breakthrough. This clearly showed the importance of realm. 9 out of 10 so-called cultivators used to practice in order to improve their realms. Otherwise, it was quite easy to merely increase the strength. An expert could give anything to reach to the peak, or could possibly swallow lots of heavenly treasures, and so on. And these methods could enhance the martial power very rapidly. However, they could easily meet with accidental rebound if they didn't have enough mental control. And their 100 years of cultivation could vanish all of a sudden. The biggest function of this enlightened mind ancient tree was that it could help a person to clearly see through their own mind. And it was very important to clearly become aware of one's own conscience for the sake of cultivation. However, that was impossible for a majority of people. In fact, it was very difficult to accomplish for those people who were too smart for their own good, or those who indulged in plotting against others. Therefore, the so-called pure and innocent like the heart of a newborn was the rarest statement. The clearer a person could see through their own mind, the better the cultivation of their mental state would become. And there were plenty of methods to quickly increase the strength if the cultivation of the mental state could be increased rapidly. It's just like an engine of the battleship. The weight of the battleship is of no consequence as long as sufficient power is supplied, therefore, one could well imagine how appealing this enlightened mind ancient tree was for these experts. In fact, even the ancient folklores had never spoken of many people who had possessed an entire enlightened mind ancient tree. However, the enlightened mind ancient tree that had appeared this time didn't blot out the sky and cover the earth as mentioned in the folklores. It wasn't extremely tall. In fact, it was merely the size of a man. So, it was totally different from its version in the folklores. However, someone guessed that this was only a branch of the enlightened mind ancient tree that had grown up and taken shape of late. So, its efficacy might not be as good as that of the entire enlightened mind ancient tree. However, it was sufficient to make countless experts crazy. However, God knows how many terrifying experts would have arrived here if the complete tree had appeared. However, even if this small branch was sufficient to make countless people crazy, the sage and great sage experts, who had gone into the depths of this huge planet looking for that wind dragon's left behind treasures, returned to compete over this small plant. These rumors fell into Yishuan's ears as well. However, he didn't pay attention to them. The most important thing for him was to condense 1,000 Tao principles. And he would only be satisfied if that were to happen. Bang! Yishuan's cave suddenly shook fiercely. A heavy object had crashed on the vacant land in front of that cave. Yishuan swept out his divine sense, and discovered that the object that had come to crash was a small tree. It was the size of a person. It was reddish-brown in its entirety, just like an unknown metal. It was emitting a strange light, and this light flickered and dazzled. Each leaf on that tree appeared like white jade. And its entire body was translucent. A quick glance at it could make a person sink deeply into oneself. It was like watching everything from one's own past appear before one's eyes. Yishuan suddenly thought. Could it be that rumored enlightened mind ancient tree? To be continued. Chapter 424. Yishuan awakened Emo. Emo had been busy cultivating the Azura blood rice inside the heavenly source mirror. Yishuan had merely taken a part of the seeds of the Azura blood rice. But he hadn't obtained the spiritual arteries yet. Therefore, he couldn't cultivate it on a large scale. And he could only cultivate the seeds to a small extent. He had already harvested the rest of the Azura blood rice, and had stored the crop. The Azura blood rice wouldn't be of great use to Yishuan if cultivated on a small scale. And he could only get enormous benefits if it was to be cultivated on a large scale. However, he was accustomed to multitasking. He had constantly been doing multiple things at a time since the beginning when he had first obtained the mysterious space. So, he had grown so used to it that it came naturally to him. Yishuan, this is a big opportunity, ah? You've guessed it right. This is a sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree. However, it's still in infancy. Emo exclaimed loudly in excitement. This is a treasure that even the Devil King didn't possess. In fact, not many people possess the enlightening mind ancient tree even if we were to believe the folklores. However, every person who has come to possess the enlightening mind ancient tree has become a world-shaking expert. Your cultivation would advance by leaps and bounds if you had this sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree in your hand. This divine item was exceptionally precious. One could well imagine how precious it was from the fact that even the Devil King hadn't possessed one. Yishuan's cultivation would advance smoothly if he could have the assistance of this enlightening mind ancient tree. He wouldn't need to worry about the growth of his mind as long as he was able to cultivate under this tree. And there obviously wouldn't be any hindrance. It would have obviously been very difficult to deal with it if it were a fully grown enlightening mind ancient tree. In fact, even a great sage realm expert could be thrashed to death by a single branch of a full matured tree. Yishuan had seen this enlightening mind ancient tree fall from the sky. It had sustained cuts of all sizes on its entire body. And multicolored divine fluid was flowing out of its wounds. It seemed as if it had gone through a threshing war. But its roots had suddenly penetrated into the ground, and had begun to absorb the spirit energy from the grounded dragon's vein. And the cuts on its body gradually began to repair with the unceasing absorption of the spirit energy. This sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree isn't stupid. It knows that a dragon's vein is present underground. That's why it has escaped and arrived here. It can be assumed from its appearance that it's being chased, Emo said. The so-called spiritual trees possessed a soul inside their body. Moreover, this enlightening mind ancient tree was an ancient variety of the spiritual trees. So, it was bound to have one. But it was still in infancy. So, its spiritual wisdom might be immature as well. However, it nevertheless possessed spiritual wisdom, and knew where it should go and where it shouldn't. Moreover, it was impossible for this kind of spiritual tree to stay rooted at one place till death. So, it wasn't easy to catch it since it could always run away when under the threat of getting caught. The news about the appearance of the enlightening mind ancient tree had spread throughout this huge planet. So, several people were covetously eyeing this enlightening mind ancient tree. And it was hard to tell how many times it had been intercepted by them until now. In fact, this enlightening mind ancient tree could expect to run into countless experts in the future since many people would arrive to cut off a portion of it. Let alone other people, even Yishiwen was drooling over it. It's not good. Yishiwen, this tree may draw other experts here. That would be too bad. Yamos suddenly responded. Yishiwen could have avoided the big problem by walking away in normal times. And he could have even taken away this sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree. However, he was undergoing closed-door training right now. So, he had put the entirety of his strength into making a breakthrough. Therefore, he couldn't go anywhere else. And it would be too bad for him if he was discovered. After all, those people out there weren't the friendly type. Yumo's voice hadn't even faded away when a figure arrived treading on the rainbow light. And he burst into laughter when he spotted the enlightening mind ancient tree. Ha ha, I, Yuan Hongro, am really lucky. I will undergo the closed-door practice for several hundred years after I've obtained this enlightening mind ancient tree. And I will become invincible after that. Yishiwen swept out his divine sense. It was an over 20 years old heroic young man. He was clad in purple-colored magnificent clothes. His stature was tall and straight. Yishiwen became aware of this young man's origin as soon as he heard him call his own name. Many top Heaven's Pride level experts of the younger generation had revealed their talents in this last more than a year's time. And their fame had spread throughout the planet as a result. This Yuan Honglo was one such expert, apart from Pang Yangbo of course. It was said that Yuan Honglo was from the northern region. In fact, he was from the northern desolate land's biggest force longevity heaven. He was a Heaven's Pride level expert of the young generation, and been specially nurtured by the longevity heaven. So, it was hard to find his rival in the younger generation of the northern desolate land. He was one of the most active ones among all the top experts of the younger generation who had arrived at this huge planet. His strength had reached the peak of the late stage of semi-sage realm. And he had already condensed 999 principles. So, he was only one step away from entering the sage realm. This was sufficient to be revered as a top expert in the younger generation. Yuan Hongzhou held a pitchfork in his hand. And he rushed towards the enlightening mind ancient tree without any hesitation in order to catch it. However, the enlightening mind ancient tree began to flee. It pulled out its roots from the soil. And its roots started to appear like countless legs. It then began to run at an amazing speed. Where do you think you are going? Yuan Honglo brandished his pitchfork. It flew forward like a roaring black dragon, and ferociously nailed the two stems of the enlightening mind ancient tree to the ground in an instant. The entire body of the enlightening mind ancient tree started to quiver. And multicolored divine fluid gushed out of its body. It was evidently in extreme pain. This is just like disaster approaches from the sky while the person sits at home. Yishiwen secretly frowned. The appearance of this enlightening mind ancient tree in this vicinity wasn't a big fortune for him. It was an absolute disaster for him, on the contrary. The enlightening mind ancient tree would attract numerous experts here. In fact, it might even attract sage experts from the depths of the planet after some time. And that would be too bad for him. There were many Sage Realm and Great Sage Realm experts present on this huge planet. These experts had rushed towards the Wind Dragon's lair after it had been suspected to be found. However, this didn't mean that they wouldn't return. Enlightening Mind Ancient Tree was too big an attraction to resist. It was merely a small sampling, and it would probably take 10,000 years or even 100,000 years to mature. But it was still a priceless treasure. Yi Shiwen wouldn't have been wary of this Yuan Honglo on ordinary days. In fact, he wouldn't have cared even if many experts had arrived. However, he was undergoing closed-door training. Moreover, he was at the juncture of making a breakthrough. So, he couldn't bear any disturbance at the moment, since he could experience a rebound, and accidentally turn into a devil. However, he was capable of multitasking. An average person wouldn't even have the time to think about something else if they were in his place. Yi Shiwen became somewhat anxious in his heart. However, his mental state was in order, and there were no ripples in his mind. He didn't allow his mind to fall into turmoil. He knew that it was necessary not to become anxious in this time of urgency. Otherwise, it would be counterproductive. Ha ha, I'm genuinely the child of destiny. I will become the top expert of the longevity heaven with the assistance of this enlightening mind ancient tree. Yuan Honglo laughed out loud. He stretched out his big hand. It transformed into a big hand made up of energy, and covered the entire sky as it advanced towards the enlightening mind ancient tree to grab it. Don't even think about that! A loud shout came from behind Yuan Honglo. A terrifying lightning ripped open the space as it swept down from the sky towards Yuan Honglo to chop him down. Yuan Hongzhou's reaction wasn't slow either. He immediately stretched out his palm. And he pinched and scattered the lightning attack. However, he was surprised to see a small figure not far away from him. This figure was coming towards him treading on the rainbow light. Yi Shiwen swept out his divine sense, and realized that it was that Peng Yangbo whom he had tidied up quite miserably almost a year ago. In fact, this kid had become even sharper from what he used to be a year ago, like an unsheathed sword. Yuan Honglo, this enlightening mind ancient tree belongs to me. No one else is worthy of this tree. Peng Yangbo had the vigor of a dragon, and the ferocity of a tiger. He took mighty strides, and arrived in front of Yuan Honglo. He didn't have any scruples in facing the powerful Yuan Honglo. The enlightening mind ancient tree was about to fall into Yuan Hongzhou's hand. However, Peng Yangbo had suddenly interfered. Yuan Hongzhou's complexion had turned exceptionally ugly because of this. He coldly said, "You are just a baby who still sucks his mother's milk. How can you deserve such a precious treasure?" Yuan Hongzhou had spoken rather bluntly. And Peng Yangbo's little face sunk as he heard this remark. He didn't like when someone said anything about his age. An immense hatred emerged inside his heart for Yuan Honglo. Peng Yangbo and Yuan Hongzhou had fought several times in the past, and both the individuals were on the same level. Therefore, he had already disliked him. His killing intention had become even more obvious. And it went all out towards Yuan Honglo. Yuan Honglo was also infuriated with Peng Yangbo since the kid had ruined his chance. In fact, he had even hoped for Yi Shiwen to eliminate Peng Yangbo in the past. Neither of you deserves this valuable treasure. Only this young master does. A clear and bright voice sounded. A figure arrived treading on the rainbow light. He held a folding fan in his hand. He appeared like a handsome and elegant young master. Yi Shiwen became surprised when he saw this man. This man was none other than young Master Feng. If one would compare this man with his past self whom Yi Shiwen had brutally beaten a year and a half ago, one would see that his injuries from that time had already restored. Even his cultivation had made a huge progress. He had condensed 999 Tao principles. He was at the peak of the late stage of semi-sage realm. However, such kind of progress in more than a year's time wasn't surprising. These experts had arrived thick and fast. And all of them were covetously eyeing that sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree. In fact, they were literally drooling over it. So, they all wanted to get hold of it. Moreover, Yi Shiwen perceived the ruthlessness of their nature, and was convinced that they would destroy it if they themselves got defeated, but they wouldn't leave it for the others. I heard that this huge planet is a lair of the wind dragon. But I didn't expect that I will get to see the enlightening mind ancient tree here. This is a rare treasure. I, Chief Ethan, am really lucky. A golden light came flying from far away along with a burst of clear and hearty laughter. The golden overflowed everywhere, and illuminated the surroundings. A human holding a spear arrived from far away. He trod on the rainbow light like a golden god of war. Yishiwen's eyes opened wide. The man who had arrived just now was a close acquaintance of his. However, he hadn't seen Chief Ifan in a long time. He saw the manner in which Chief Ifan held a spear in his hand. He looked invincible, just like the golden god of war. His aura had become vigorous and profound. The profound Tao principles were wrapped around his entire body. He had already reached the peak of the late stage of semi-sage realm. His body had 999 Tao principles. These Tao principles were incomparably thick. He had certainly become several times more tyrannical than he used to be in the past. To be continued. So, they desperately launched attacks towards him, and all sorts of attacks swept across. However, Yuan Hongzhou was already prepared for it. He dodged these attacks, and continued to move towards the enlightening mind ancient tree. Everyone was agitated. And they were unwilling to give up when they saw Yuan Hongzhou gain an upper hand. They obviously couldn't allow him obtain the advantage. Wind Spirit Hand Seal! Young Master Feng effortlessly used the seal's secret. Suddenly, an endless amount of spirit energy was absorbed from the surroundings, and got condensed into a dreadful seal. It then pounded towards Yuan Hongzhou. Rumble! The entire ground cracked and collapsed. But Yuan Hongzhou managed to dodge. He avoided the attack, but huge hole formed in the ground. It belongs to me. No one else can have it! Peng Yangbo became incomparably aggressive. He raised his eyebrow, and forged ahead as he shouted. Then, a big hand made up of wind and thunder swept towards the enlightening mind ancient tree to grab it. Nobody could give up under this situation. Nobody wanted to give up either. Clang! A sound of the collision of metals resounded in the sky. A golden sword transformed into a huge mountain, and smashed down. Rumble! The entire ground was split open by this attack of Chief Ifan. Saying anything would be pointless under this circumstance. So, they could only depend on their individual strength. One could only force the other people into submission and grab this item if they possessed enough strength. However, several more people still dared to rush into this chaotic war of hundreds of experts. They ignored the others, and merely aimed to get to the forefront. Their bodies got bombarded as a result, and turned into fine powder by the countless attacks from the other people. Chief Ifan and the other three individuals were obviously more powerful than the others, so they dared to rush forward as well. Get lost! This enlightening mind ancient tree belongs to my longevity heaven! Yuan Hongzhou roared repeatedly. His complexion had become exceptionally ugly. He was the first one to arrive here. So, he could have left after he had obtained the enlightening mind ancient tree. However, he hadn't anticipated that such a fight would break out when he had first arrived here. And this had become the main reason for his presently angered state of mind. Crack! A loud sound of the shattering of space sounded. Yuan Hongzhou's pitchfork moved on its own, and flew back to his hand. And his fighting strength increased even more as he held his weapon again. More than 100 people were fighting in groups. So one would come across the joint attacks of other people if they tried to approach the enlightening mind ancient tree. However, the enlightening mind ancient tree suddenly began to run since it was no longer pinned down by the pitchfork. And Yishiwen became numb with fear because he realized that the enlightening mind ancient tree had started to run towards the cave's direction. He would be exposed if it continued to run in this direction. Humph, you think you can escape? A loud snort sounded, and a big hand of wind and thunder pressed down upon the enlightening mind ancient tree. The enlightening mind ancient tree was running at a very fast speed. It even managed to dodge this sudden and violent attack of the big wind thunder hand. However, this attack was immediately followed by the joint attacks of hundreds of experts. They had arrived here to obtain this enlightening mind ancient tree. So, they naturally couldn't allow it to escape. Otherwise, wouldn't it defeat their purpose to come here? Rumble! Yishiwen's hill-sized cave collapsed under this first sudden and violent attack. In fact, it was blown to pieces. The smoke and dust dispersed and a figure sitting in a cross-legged position appeared in front of everyone. "You are!" Two individuals shouted in unison. These were Peng Yangbo and young Master Feng. These two individuals possessed immense hatred for Yishiwen. Yishiwen had taught a lesson to Peng Yangbo in the past, and Peng Yangbo had lost his face as a result, whereas young Master Feng had been chased and beaten like a dog by Yishiwen. In fact, he would be long dead had he not used the transmission scroll back then. Therefore, they looked at Yishiwen as if they had come across a mortal enemy. They were exceptionally envious of him. So, they simultaneously glared at him. "Young Yi?" Chief Ifan was also very surprised as he saw that figure sitting in a cross-legged position. He could tell that this person was Yishiwen. Yishiwen had been surprised to see the speed of Chief Ifan's progress a moment ago. The same had happened with Chief Ifan at this moment. After all, Yishiwen's progress was far too quick. In fact, his own progress speed couldn't be compared with Yishiwen's. That was because Chief Ifan had already become an extremely powerful expert of the half-step legendary realm several years ago. And Yishiwen hadn't even reached legendary realm at that time. So, there was a difference of heaven and earth between him and Yishiwen. However, Yishiwen had caught up to him in the past few years. This speed was way faster than his own. In fact, his speed was nothing in comparison to Yishiwen's. However, he was surprised to see that the sprout of enlightening mind ancient tree had already arrived behind Yishiwen. In fact, it had rooted itself behind him. And it had stretched out its entire leaves and branches, and had shrouded Yishiwen. In other words, it had chosen Yishiwen as its master. Yishiwen suddenly felt a brightness of enlightenment inside his heart. Myriads of bustling emotions and conflicts came floating like cloud in front of his eyes. These were visual representations of his conscience. And they had suddenly cleared up to appear before him. He immediately sensed a huge desire to step forward. He had constantly been thinking of a method to condense the 1000th Tao principles. However, he had suddenly obtained the solution. This enlightening mind ancient tree was truly magical. It had indeed lived up to its reputation. However, this enlightening mind ancient tree had mysteriously recognized its master. So, this had obviously made Yishiwen everyone's target. He was at the center of the struggle. Only young Master Feng and Peng Yangbo possessed immense hatred for him a moment ago. However, each one of those hundreds of experts had started to harbor sentiments of hatred towards him in a breath's time. And each of these individuals was a peak expert of the semi-sage realm. Moreover, each of them had condensed 700 to 800 Tao principles. Yishiwen wouldn't be worried if there were one or two experts. However, there were so many people present here. Yishiwen wouldn't have been afraid to snatch it if it was an ordinary day. How could they have stopped him? However, he couldn't rush off at this time because he was trapped. He was in the middle of something important, and the trouble had literally knocked on his door. Countless experts imposing auras swept towards Yishiwen from afar, and swept away everything like a vast sea. Each expert present on this site was an elite in their own merit. And now, Yishiwen was forced to face the pressure of so many experts at once. Gentlemen, this so-called spiritual treasure has its own soul. So, we have no choice but to leave since the enlightening mind ancient tree has recognized its master. Chief Ifan came to a halt at this time. He then spoke as he laughed. However, he was firmly holding the long sword in his hand. In fact, he would have attacked and plundered the enlightening mind ancient tree if it had fallen into someone else's hand. However, he couldn't do so since it had fallen into Yishiwen's hand. Yishiwen was surrounded, but he still paid attention to Chief Ifan's action. He knew that Chief Ifan had taken the practical approach to protect him. Only a small action, just a little bit, but that could make enough room for him to get out of this mess. Then, he wouldn't need to be scared of these people. What you just spoke is very pleasant to hear, but do you think it will be enough to send us away? I am determined to obtain this enlightening mind ancient tree today, and I will kill anyone who dares to get in my way, Yuan Hongou coldly said. He was the first one to find this enlightening mind ancient tree. So, he had already decided that it belonged to him. How could he allow it to fall into someone else's hand? Today is the day you die! You actually dare to steal my stuff again! A sinister look appeared on young Master Feng's face as he looked at Yi Shiwen. This was the second time that Yi Shiwen had snatched the victory from his hands. In fact, he had been chased and beaten like a dog by Yi Shiwen the last time. And this enmity was irreconcilable. So, he couldn't possibly give up on his revenge. Peng Yangbo also hated Yi Shiwen. So, he too wanted to kill Yi Shiwen this time. Yi Shiwen had used invincible power to defeat him. But Yi Shiwen hadn't killed him. However, Yi Shiwen had left him in a broken state. So, Yi Shiwen had left an intractable problem behind for him. Therefore, this matter would continue to gnaw at Peng Yangbo's mind, and wouldn't be resolved as long as Yi Shiwen was alive. And he wouldn't feel happy till Yi Shiwen had died. Peng Yangbo could use this opportunity to eradicate Yi Shiwen, and his cultivation wouldn't come across any obstruction in the future. Moreover, he would be also short of one major enemy in the future. He might be young and immature, but he was an extremely vicious and merciless person. The other people had faced many difficulties in search of this enlightening mind ancient tree. So, they didn't wish to give up halfway there. However, they could only look at this enlightening mind ancient tree helplessly since they were being told they couldn't have it even though they wanted it. The folklores recounted that someone had cultivated under an enlightening Ming ancient tree, and had surmounted the great sage realm after practicing for less than 10 days. The said person had then become a dreadful expert, an individual who used to be feared then, and now. Moreover, this was just a small plant of the enlightening mind ancient tree, and had sprouted only recently. So, it would take 100,000 years, or even several 100,000 years for it to mature. However, it was still a priceless ancient treasure. Therefore, it was impossible to let it go at this point. Boy, you can only blame your misfortune that this enlightening mind ancient tree has recognized you as its master. Yuan Hongou took the lead to rise and revolt. He then brandished his pitchfork. To be continued. Chapter 426. Yuan Hongou took the initiative and rose in revolt. His pitchfork emitted unrestrained murderous aura, just like a fierce black dragon. It instantly shuttled a distance of over 100 meters, and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. It didn't appear like a pitchfork. Rather, it seemed like a dreadful object made up of ominous energy that was overwhelmingly sweeping over towards Yi Shiwen with endless imposing aura. Stop! Qi Fifan moved into action at this time. His long sword swept out boundless aura. The sword energy rushed over, and swept down in a slash. Bang! The sword energy ferociously crashed upon that pitchfork. That pitchfork trembled violently, and got nailed down to the ground. The explosion opened a huge crack in the ground. The sword energy swept across after the crack opened. Yuan Hongzhou's complexion turned somewhat ugly. He coldly looked at Qi Fifan since the man had turned out to be a very difficult opponent. A huge and chaotic war had erupted, but Qi Fifan had a relatively higher degree of self-control among these four people. So, he hadn't gone all out from the get-set-go mark. However, this move was enough to prove that Qi Fifan wasn't an ordinary person. Yuan Hongou had underestimated a world hero. Qi Fifan could very well be regarded as the top powerhouse in the younger generation. However, he didn't wish to give up because of one man alone. So, he shouted, "This man is stopping us. Will you guys keep staring blankly at this? Let's get together and do it!" Peng Yangbo and young Master Feng rushed towards Qi Fifan to kill him as soon as they heard this. They had realized that they must eradicate Qi Fifan first in order to kill Yi Shiwen since he was blocking their way. Otherwise, they couldn't even think of getting near Yi Shiwen. A spiritual seal fell down towards Qi Fifan. It had the power to overturn the sky and trample the ocean. Clang! A longsword attack was unleashed. And the released sword energy filled the entire sky. Rumble! The spiritual seal was cut into two halves. However, Peng Yangbo had brandished a thunder blade at the same time. He rushed towards Qi Fifan like a thunder god. Qi Fifan's complexion was calm. He hadn't fallen into a disadvantageous position even while facing the joint attacks of 3 experts. His sword skill was at its best, and was giving him an all-round protection. Even a drop of water couldn't approach him, let alone these people. Yi Shiwen was emotionally moved by this. Chief Ifan didn't have to take such a risk for him, but he still did, and that too on his own accord. This man genuinely deserved deep respect. However, Yi Shiwen also knew that he must focus on the task at hand right now. The problem would be solved if he could make the breakthrough in time. Then, he wouldn't have to be wary of these people. Right now, Yi Shiwen's luck was both good and bad. The enlightening mind ancient tree had chosen him its master. However, he had also come across a big crisis because of it. So, even making an escape wouldn't be enough after this isolated matter had been resolved. A group of sage experts, and even great sage experts, would come looking for him once they found out that the enlightening mind ancient tree had fallen into his hands. Guys, he's being constrained at this moment. So, let's take the advantage of this opportunity to plunder the enlightening mind ancient tree, one of those over 100 experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm shouted. And it seemed as if the others had been woken up by this idea of taking advantage of the fight between these 4 ferocious experts. So, they rushed towards the enlightening mind ancient tree to grab it, since it wouldn't be a good thing for them if it fell into the hands of those 4 individuals. That expert was the first one to react. He also ran faster than the others. And he arrived in front of Yi Shiwen in a flash. His long blade slashed down, and it seemed as if it would cut the entire world open. The space was split open wherever the blade went, and endless astral winds swept out. It possessed endless might. These people were also the peak experts of the semi-sage realm, even though they weren't a match of those other 4 individuals. So, they still couldn't be underestimated. Hee, this belongs to me. That expert laughed out loud since he realized that Yi Shiwen was unable to move. He could grab the enlightening mind ancient tree right away, and then he would escape far away. Who could chase him then? Even the Heaven's Pride level experts would then become mediocre before him, at least in his personal opinion. Bang! An endless blood ocean suddenly swept towards that expert to shroud him. His blade energy was blocked off, and repelled outward. A bloody figure had appeared at Yi Shiwen's side to protect him. Young Master Feng's eyes opened wide as he saw this bloody figure. This bloody figure and Yi Shiwen had collaborated to thrash him pretty bad the last time they had met. So, he had been left with no choice but to run away in panic at that juncture. In fact, the last 3 of his subordinated had to be executed after that incident. However, he was engaged in a fight with a top expert. How he could relax even a bit? Chief Ifan got an opportunity because of this momentary distraction on young Master Feng's part, and broke his wind spirit hand seal. Then, he found an opening, and suddenly arrived in front of young Master Feng and kicked him. Bang! Young Master Feng was sent flying by Chief Ifan's kick. Several bones in his body had been broken by the kick. The pressure was greatly reduced from Chief Ifan after young Master Feng was temporarily kicked out of the fray. These individuals had been fighting a fierce battle until now, but the bravest among them had suddenly obtained the winning position. Moreover, the blood slave had suddenly appeared on the other side, and had stopped that expert. The blood slave had reached the peak of the semi-sage realm in this over a year's time. Moreover, it had condensed 999 Tao principles. So, it wasn't one bit inferior to Yi Shiwen from the time the latter had sat for breakthrough. This was the real reason why Yi Shiwen had dared to undergo such a deep closed-door training in such a dangerous place. There wasn't much difference between him and that blood slave. Moreover, the blood slave seemed in a hurry. Its master's consciousness had submerged completely in the process of condensing the 1000th Tao principle. Therefore, blood slave's hands transformed into a pair of dragon claws. And it crushed that approaching blade energy. That expert was flying in the air, and his imposing aura was surging and boiling. He certainly wasn't an ordinary person. That expert unleashed the world-shaking blade energy once again. And dozens of feet-long blade energy swept down towards Yi Shiwen. The blood slave couldn't avoid this attack since Yishuin was sitting like a statue behind him. So it moved forward, treading on endless waves of blood, and welcomed the incoming attack. Everyone guessed that the battle between that expert and the blood slave had arrived at its conclusion. Suddenly, a blood light swept out in a flash. A blood sword emerged out from the endless blood waves, and cut that expert in half without any delay. Then, the blood slave came to a halt. It was still riding above the blood waves. It seemed as if it was standing above all, and was looking disdainfully at the entire world from the corner of its eyes. It coldly stared at those people and rushed towards them. Its gaze appeared as electrifying as two streaks of red lightning. Its facial features weren't clearly visible. However, its energy covered the entire surroundings. Chief Ifan had become anxious when he had seen that Yishuin might get killed. However, he relaxed after he saw that Yishuin had a backup plan for his protection. Chief Ifan realized that Yishuin had taken genuine precautions, wasn't akin to a lost fellow. Chief Ifan couldn't clearly see the blood man, but this blood man's energy core was enough to indicate that it wasn't inferior to him. In fact, it was also a peak expert. More than 100 people had rushed towards Yishuin, but they had been scared away by the blood slave's severe attack. However, they were more than 100 individuals in number, and each of them was an elite from a particular region. So, how could they be scared away so easily? The murderous auras of more than 100 people swept across the sky. Yishuin's motionless body also began to emit a heaven-shaking aura. It gradually expanded, and became stronger, little by little. Everyone's complexions changed as they saw this. They could feel that Yishuin was trying to make a breakthrough. They didn't know what kind of breakthrough it was, and to which level it would take the practitioner. However, everyone knew that they mustn't allow him to make the breakthrough, especially those people who held grudge against him. Everyone knew that they would come across a huge disaster if he came out powered up after he had made the breakthrough. Kill! Those experts bellowed, and rushed towards Yishuin. They launched their strongest attacks on the blood slave. The blood slave also counterattacked. The dreadful blood waves condensed into a huge seal, inverting ocean seal. It appeared like an unrestrained sea that would crush anything in its way. It swept down, and ferociously collided with the attacks of those experts. This was the second type of the overturning the heaven seal, the inverting ocean seal. Yishuin had strived to improve his martial arts techniques in the past more than a year's time. The Han seal had progressed to become overturning the heaven seal. So, the power of inverting ocean seal had also increased several times. It might be an extremely strange and extraordinary technique for other people. However, it was just a terrifying and truly disastrous technique for Yishuin. It exploded in the sky. Then, the terrifying power pressed down and shattered a vast chunk of space. The terrifying energy waves spread across the world. The blood slave unleashed a terrifying power, which then transformed into a blood pond. Those several experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm launched attacks with the entirety of their strength. It carried a terrifying power. The blood slave couldn't block such a large-scale attack, and got exploded into fragments in the end. However, those experts also had half of their bodies exploded into fragments by the blood slave's inverting ocean seal. They screamed endlessly. However, these experts hadn't even begun to feel happy when they suddenly saw that the blood slave had regenerated little by little. Everyone stared blankly in shock. Such an attack had made them harbor a sense of despair. This battle continued without any result. The blood slave wasn't a match for all of them together. However, they couldn't kill the blood slave either. How would they be able to go past him if they continued to fight like this? Everyone, let's keep attacking him together. I don't think that this thing can continue to regenerate at this rate, an expert shouted at this time. Even other experts thought that this man was right. How could this blood slave continue to regenerate again and again? It certainly had its limit. And they would have to break that limit to break through, and go past. Everyone was engaged in a bloody battle. Chief Ifan and those 3 experts were fighting in one group. And those 100 or so experts were fighting with the blood slave in another group. The battlefield situation had become exceptionally intense in the war between the two sides. The consequence would be extremely serious if Chififan and the Blood Slave could drag this battle until Yishiwen was done with his breakthrough. On the contrary, the result would be completely different if these experts managed to kill Yishiwen before he could make the breakthrough. A violent collision occurred between the two sides. To be continued. In fact, it was just marginally different from the one a person exudes when they enter the Sage Realm. However, it still didn't give the feeling of Sage Realm. The sword moves the 9 states, Chififan sneered. And his long sword swept down. It emitted golden divine beams, and these seemingly incredible beams scattered in all directions. The sword attack went towards young Master Feng, who was currently the weakest among these 3 individuals. Young Master Feng retreated several steps. In fact, he had nearly been split into 2 halves by that sword light. His complexion turned exceptionally ugly. An arrogant guy like him had been targeted as the weakest one. Moreover, he knew that he would have no way to defend himself if the opposite party launched another attack on him. He was the weakest among those 4 individuals. In fact, Chififan wouldn't have required several sword attacks to kill him if he wasn't being supported by the other 2 individuals. He would have been chopped into 2 halves a long time ago. Moreover, he would have died a very violent death. This realization had made him exceptionally depressed. However, he couldn't do anything about it. Bang! Peng Yangbo took advantage of this opportunity, and swept out thunder and lightning. It struck Chififan, and he began to stagger. His legs had nearly been broken by the tremendous force. Young Master Feng was slightly weaker, but the other 3 individuals were almost equally strong. Therefore, they had to be careful. The others could grab the opportunity if any one of them was found off guard. Bang! The Blood Slave dispersed under the attacks once again. It transformed into a large mass of blood, and scattered. And everyone jumped in joy as they saw that the obstruction in front of Yishiwen had finally disappeared. So several experts promptly rushed towards Yishiwen in order to kill him. They could tell that the Blood Slave was being controlled by Yishiwen. So, the Blood Slave would automatically disperse, and wouldn't come back if they could kill Yishiwen. Whoosh! A loud metal clanging sound echoed. Several people had launched their attacks at once. However, these attacks couldn't strike Yishiwen's body. A scarlet barrier had appeared in front of Yishiwen. A plain-looking mirror had begun to rotate over Yishiwen's head in order to protect him. The experts had gone all out, and had unleashed terrifying force. So several of the experts had their hands broken by the rebound. Everyone was dumbstruck. They were sent in shock as soon as they saw the heavenly source mirror hover above Yishiwen's head. This was a sage tool. So how could they beat it? They had never possessed a sage tool, but they had seen one before. So they knew that this sage tool was dreadful as soon as they saw it. In fact, most of the sage experts didn't possess a sage tool to protect their bodies. But Yishiwen had a sage tool. This had left them to feel conflicted and aggravated. Bang! Chififan couldn't resist the joint attacks of these 3 individuals anymore. And Yuan Hongzhou's attack rumbled on his body, and he went flying upside down. The might of the joint attacks of these 3 individuals was too terrifying. However, nobody paid attention to Chififan. Peng Yangbo and the other 2 immediately rushed towards Yishiwen with large strides. They went straight for kill, especially young Master Feng. In fact, he had displayed an astonishing agility skill. So, his speed surpassed the speed of the other 2, and he managed to arrive near Yishiwen almost instantly. The Wind Spirit Hand seal appeared in his hand. He needed to interrupt Yishiwen's breakthrough. And he needed to take the advantage of the situation to kill Yishiwen. Only that could eliminate the hatred from his heart. Nobody in the younger generation had ever forced him into such a distressed state, except this man in front of him. But the bitterness in his heart would vanish if he could kill this man. Bang! The Wind Spirit Hand seal crashed down. It ferociously pounded on the heavenly source mirror, and set off violent energy waves. It seemed as if a huge stone had dropped into the water. Young Master Feng had already arrived in front of Yishiwen to kill him. And he just wanted to kill him, no matter whether Yishiwen possessed a sage tool or not. Bang! An invincible and imposing aura burst out of Yishiwen's body. His golden divinities formed a divine ocean, and began to surge about. Unrestrained waves of divinities blotted out the sky and covered the earth as they advanced towards young Master Feng to engulf him. Young Master Feng was greatly startled. He hadn't anticipated that Yishiwen could use so many methods even when he was undergoing closed-door training. He had even arrived in front of Yishiwen, and was about to kill him, but Yishiwen still possessed such a means. However, that was only for a while. Young Master Feng moved left and right inside the golden divine waves in order to escape. He exerted the entirety of his strength. However, he was surprised when he saw a big golden hand coming out of the curtain of those divine waves. The big hand tore open the curtain of golden waves, and slapped towards young Master Feng. Bang! Young Master Feng was sent flying by the slap. In fact, the tremendous power of that slap had nearly beheaded him. Everyone was sent spiraling into a huge shock as they stared blankly at this scene. What kind of power was this? They obviously knew that young Master Feng was strong. In fact, he was only marginally inferior to Pang Yang Bo and the other two. Basically, his fighting strength could be considered at the peak. However, that big hand had effortlessly slapped him, and he was sent flying. Just how formidable was the wielder of that big hand? A figure came out of that torn golden divine curtain. It was treading on the rainbow light. Could this be the Yishiwen who was undergoing the closed-door training a moment ago? Everyone looked on, and noticed that Yishiwen's divine aura appeared restrained, like that of an ordinary person. His aura had become smooth and riche. It seemed as if it had returned to its original form. Yishiwen's cold eyes stared at everyone. His killing intention was overflowing. Everyone was terrified to see his transformation. However, only he knew that he had finally made the breakthrough to the limit of 1,000 Tao principles. World-shaking sounds had been issued during his previous breakthroughs. However, this breakthrough was noiseless, similar to the manner in which the spring rain moistens an object. There wasn't any noise. It wasn't a noisy breakthrough with brute force. It was merely a logical breakthrough. He could still feel the change though. He had just condensed one more principle this time. However, his power had become 10 times stronger than what it used to be at the time when he possessed 999 Tao principles. He had just condensed just one more principle, but all the matrix formations within his body had been perfected. The circulation of real elemental energy had also smoothened up. So, he could blow his own past self to pieces with just a punch with this present strength. He had changed innately. In fact, he could vaguely feel that he was at the doorstep of the Sage Realm. An average person might feel the Sage Realm existence after they had condensed 500 Tao principles. The more Tao principle one could accommodate in one's body, the later they felt the presence of Sage Realm. However, Yishiwen had finally been able to touch it. His realm was still some distance away from the Sage Realm. However, his strength had been able to touch a thin film near it. However, this thin film was still as solid as an iron wall. Yishiwen had tried to break it, but it simply didn't break open. Young Master Feng had gone flying upside down. However, Yishiwen didn't let him go. He took a step forward, and appeared in front of young Master Feng the very next instant. In fact, he had moved so fast that no one saw it happen. "No, you can't kill me!" Young Master Feng shivered. He shouted in fear. He was genuinely very afraid in this moment. He had hated Yishiwen to the extremely. He knew that Yishiwen was quite ferocious. However, he hadn't been very afraid of him. That was because Yishiwen had collaborated with the Blood Slave back then. And they could kill him if they had worked together. However, he wasn't afraid if it was only Yishiwen alone. However, this attack had made him realize that he was mistaken. Yishiwen was insanely strong. Most of the bones inside young Master Feng's body had been shattered by a causal slap. In fact, more than half of his body had become paralyzed. This Yishiwen had surprisingly become like a peerless god-killer after he had made a breakthrough. However, it was already too late for young Master Feng this time. Yishiwen didn't hold back. A palm fell down from the sky. It transformed into a very big golden hand, and pressed down. Bang! Young Master Feng was slapped into the ground by Yishiwen. His entire bones, internal organs as well as his soul, got crushed. To be continued. Chapter 428. Chapter 428, Kills Heaven's Pride Expert. Just one slap had killed an expert of the late stage of semi-sage realm. Nobody would have believed this if it hadn't happened before their eyes. Therefore, everyone stared blankly in shock when the scene unfolded in front of them. Everyone was terrified. In fact, they got goosebumps. They felt as if they had seen the incarnation of an exceptionally fierce beast. There had been no fierce struggle between the two experts. A mere slap had seriously injured him in the beginning. And the second slap had killed him on the spot. Such fighting strength could genuinely scare a person to death. Out of those 4 powerhouses, young Master Feng had already been slapped to death. Now, it was time for another. Yishiwen's cold eyes swept across the crowd, like a blade or a sword. And it seemed as if his piercing gaze could see through everyone's mind. You finally made the breakthrough? Chief Ifan felt his hair stand on end as soon as he saw Yishiwen. He didn't know how Yishiwen had managed to become so tyrannical. However, he was feeling very joyful for some reason. Yishiwen had finally made the breakthrough. So, his struggle to protect Yishiwen hadn't gone in vain. Yishiwen hadn't let him down at the most crucial time. He had finally made the breakthrough, and had come out successful. Brother Qi, are you all right? Thank you so much for helping me this time. The consequences could have been horrible if you hadn't stepped in, Yishiwen said. I'm okay, just sustained some bruises, that's all. Chief Ifan shook his head and replied with a laugh. A bright smile had appeared on his face. And it seemed as if he didn't care about his injuries anymore. Peng Yangbo and the other 2 individuals had been in a hurry to kill Yishiwen. He had been sent flying by their attacks, but the attacks hadn't hurt him in a serious manner because of this. Everyone listen, he's indeed a ferocious man. However, he's alone. He can't kill all of us. An expert spoke up since he was still unwilling to give up. These people just didn't wish to give up on the enlightening mind ancient tree. Yishiwen had displayed strong strength. However, they believed that he couldn't kill all of them on his own. That blood slave had also displayed very strong strength in the recent entanglement. However, it was still blown away many times over by these people. So, a real person would have already died if they were in its place. That expert had exclaimed openly, but nobody wanted to go first. They believed that he couldn't kill all of them on his own, in spite of being incredibly powerful. In fact, they weren't even afraid of sparking a bloodbath as long as they could kill him. However, the person who took the lead was sure to get annihilated. And these people weren't foolish. So, they wouldn't wish to sacrifice themselves for the success of others. However, Yishiwen's imposing aura was becoming smoother and richer with the passage of time. And Yishiwen was unceasingly consolidating his inner realm while everyone was merely watching him. He was taking advantage of everyone's hesitation. And thanks to that, he was becoming more and more ferocious. Everyone was very anxious at present. So, they weren't launching any attacks on him. However, it would be too late if he managed to consolidate his inner realm. Peng Yangbo's killing intention was seething the most among these people. Many people had rushed towards the enlightening mind ancient tree a moment ago. The sprout of the tree was behind Yishiwen. But he had rushed towards Yishiwen instead. Yishiwen had tidied him up quite miserably in the past. And that had left an indelible mark on his heart. Peng Yangbo brandished his thunder blade. Nobody around him dared to approach him. Then, a boundless ocean of lightning rushed towards Yishiwen as his dreadful killing intention overflowed in the sky. Then, Peng Yangbo immediately summoned the phantom of the thunder god without any hesitation. It ripped open the sky, and rushed down towards Yishuin with a thunder blade in his hand. The enlightening mind ancient tree's entire body had started to shiver behind Yishuin. These peak experts of the younger generation had collectively launched an attack a moment ago. So, their dreadful imposing auras were still overflowing in the sky. A timid person would have been frightened to death by now. The thunder god's thunder blade tore the sky open. And it arrived in front of Yishuin in order to kill him in the blink of an eye. Humph! Yishuin snorted. This sound of his snort wasn't too loud or anything, but it maliciously knocked against everyone's chest like a sonic blast. Yishuin soared up, and flew straight to the edge of the horizon. His formidable aura blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it swept all across. He had released this imposing aura for the first time after having made the breakthrough to the 1000th Tao principle. And he had unleashed it completely in this first time itself. Several weak experts were swept away, and were sent flying by his imposing aura alone. His hands were glowing with a golden light, and had illuminated the horizon. Then, his hands transformed into a pair of dragon's claws. And it seemed as if they'd rip the sky open. A seemingly endless power began to rampage in the sky. It seemed as if the thunder god, who had rushed towards Yishuin, had been caught by something. In fact, he had seemingly been bound with a hoop in midair, and wasn't able to move even a bit. Rip! An unpleasant ripping sound resounded. And the phantom of the thunder god roared as this sound reverberated. He had soon been ripped apart in midair. And purple-colored blood started to drip down from his body. Everyone was stunned as they witnessed this scene. They hadn't anticipated that Yishuin could be so powerful. Everyone had clearly felt the thunder god's phantom strength even though they were very far away from him. In fact, an ordinary expert of the late stage of the semi-sage realm would have gotten killed, and would have been reduced to mere dregs by just one attack of this phantom. Thunder God was Pang Yang Bo's trump card. So, how could he be ordinary? However, even he couldn't withstand a single move of Yishuin's. Many people suddenly started to despair. They would have had an opportunity to make a comeback if Yishuin were a little stronger than them, since they could have relied on their numerical advantage to overwhelm him. However, Yishuin had surprisingly become so powerful that they couldn't take him down by merely relying on excessive manpower. And this feeling had driven them to despair. Even Pang Yang Bo was in utter shock. He and Yishuin had fought over a year ago. However, Yishuin hadn't displayed such terrifying fighting strength in that fight. Even the fight between Yishuin and his Thunder God's Phantom hadn't been this relaxed and easy in the previous instance. However, Yishuin had unexpectedly become so frightening in just 1 year's time. Most importantly, he didn't sense the specific fluctuations of a sage expert on Yishuin's body. In other words, Yishuin was still a semi-sage expert, nothing more. But how could a semi-sage expert be so frightening? He himself was at the peak of the semi-sage realm. But he didn't possess any margin to fight back against Yishuin. Several experts immediately began to turn around and retreat. Such a person was extremely dreadful. These people were undoubtedly greedy, but they weren't foolish. Moreover, they didn't wish to throw their lives away. Inverted Ocean Seal! Yishuin's inverted ocean seal attack crashed down. And several experts, who were escaping away at an extremely fast pace, were crushed to death by the seal in an instant. Yishuin's eyes had turned ice cold. He didn't wish to let anyone get away. Chififan had also stood up. He had picked up his weapon, and was staring at everyone. The enlightening mind ancient tree had a great reputation. It was quite possible that many sage experts and great sage experts would arrive to cause trouble for Yishuin if the news were to spread out that the enlightening mind ancient tree had fallen into his hands. In fact, it might even give rise to a violent sensation in the true martial university. And Yishuin wouldn't be able to have any peaceful time if that were to happen. In fact, he might come across sneak attacks from the sage and great sage experts, anywhere and anytime. And he obviously didn't wish to lead the rest of his life like that. Many people didn't respond slowly since they immediately understood Yishuin's intention as soon as they saw him crush the escaping experts to death. Therefore, someone shouted out, "He doesn't wish to let us leave alive. So, we must fight with him." Many people reacted this time, not for some precious treasure, but for their own survival. Yishiwen sneered. These people had been scheming against him a little while ago. In fact, they had acted to kill him without mercy. Peng Yangbo was the first one to react. He had no other way out this time. So, he could only rush towards Yishiwen. Rumble! A big golden hand smashed down at an incredibly fast speed, just like a golden cloud. And it pounded on Peng Yangbo's body in a flash. Peng Yangbo's defense was instantaneously routed by Yishiwen. His armor was a defense-type treasure, but it was instantly shattered by Yishiwen's slap. He simply couldn't resist the power of Yishiwen's palm. And his body was immediately crushed by the slap, and was then turned into a mass of flesh and blood. Everyone present on the scene turned quiet. Only Peng Yangbo's dying screams echoed. Everyone was stunned. They hadn't anticipated that Yishiwen would turn out to be so powerful. Peng Yangbo was the strongest among them. Yes, he was very young. However, nobody thought that he was weak. What would they call themselves if they called him weak? However, even a powerhouse like him didn't have the power to fight back against Yishiwen. Could it be that Yishiwen had already achieved invincibility against contenders who were below the sage realm? Chififan was also dumbstruck when he saw this happen. His fellow younger brother had become outrageously powerful. He couldn't help but recall the rumors he had heard about Yishiwen. This was the third Heaven's Pride expert to die at his hands. Moreover, all three of them had been well-known and dreadful experts. In fact, Peng Yangbo was far stronger than the other two. So, it seemed as if the disparity between these people and Yishiwen had widened further. Yishiwen wasn't even in legendary realm at the time he had stepped on the ancient road. However, he had just killed a semi-sage realm expert, as if the youngster were a piece of cake. Yuan Hongzhou's complexion had turned ugly on the other side. He didn't harbor a sentiment of deep hatred for Yishiwen like Peng Yangbo and young Master Feng had. However, he knew that Yishiwen wanted to kill every last one of them. How could he not have guessed the reason? How could he not have become frightened and furious at this? However, he didn't get much time to think. Yishiwen's eyes turned ice-cold and ruthless as he suddenly dashed towards Yuan Honglo like a golden god of war. Yuan Honglo was the only one who could pose threat to him among these people. The others were nothing but mediocre. Therefore, Yishiwen had rushed straight towards Yuan Honglo. His footsteps shattered the space. And his incomparable imposing aura swept across and engulfed everything in its path. Yuan Honglo was barely able to prevent himself from being sent flying away. "All of you, do you wish to sit still and wait for your death?" Yuan Honglo roared as he saw Yishiwen charge towards him. He wanted to divert Yishiwen's attention. However, Yishiwen didn't give him the opportunity to continue with his speech. His palm seemingly ripped the sky open, and instantly broke Yuan Hongzhou's defense. After that, he arrived in front of Yuan Honglo and attacked. Bang! A loud bang sounded, and the bones in Yuan Hongzhou's body got crushed by the massive force of the attack. The bone fragments swirled in the air, and blood gushed out of his body. Bang! Yuan Hongzhou's tall body loudly crashed headfirst into the ground. His eyes had turned lifeless since his soul had been crushed by Yishiwen. To be continued. Chapter 429. Another man had died. Many people were already despairing since there wasn't any margin for concessions in the current situation. Moreover, Yishiwen had already demonstrated his intentions in a very clear manner. And he wouldn't allow them to leave. So, they had no other option but to go all out and fight for their lives. "I will fight with you!" An expert roared and advanced forward. However, he was killed by Yishiwen in just one slap. In fact, he didn't even get a chance to fight back. Then, Yishiwen attacked and killed several experts in a flash. The sonic booms dissipated in all directions. And the energy soared into the sky. Moreover, he had killed them in just a slap. Yi Shiwen had become 10 times more powerful than his previous self. These hundreds of experts were also regarded as elites. However, they were nothing in front of his current strength. Therefore, they had been slapped to death by Yi Shiwen. The Blood Slave and Qi Fifan had also joined in on the hunt. The Blood Slave was as unfeeling as a robot. So, it didn't show any mercy, and continued to kill people left and right. And Qi Fifan began to attack relentlessly as well. He knew very well that he mustn't allow these people to escape. Yi Shiwen might come across all kind of troubles if these experts managed to escape. Moreover, even he might get implicated into Yi Shiwen's troubles. 3 peak experts had joined hands. So, these merely dozens of leftover experts had been effortlessly sent to their deaths in a short period of time. Then, Yi Shiwen collected the spatial rings and other treasures from the bodies of these elites. One must know that each one of these experts was an elite. So, they possessed over 2 million primary spirit dawn on their bodies in total. Moreover, each of them possessed bountiful resources on their bodies, especially Yuan Hong'o, Young Master Feng, and Pang Yangbo. These 3 experts were regarded as elites among elites by their respective forces. And they were Heaven's Pride experts. So, they would naturally possess many good resources on their bodies. Yi Shiwen and Qi Fifan didn't stay for long after they had cleaned the battlefield. Yi Shiwen had killed 3 Heaven's Pride experts at once. More than hundreds of elite experts had died at his hands as well. And this would certainly shake this entire planet. Therefore, they wouldn't dare to stay here for a long time. These 2 individuals rapidly flew out. They left this huge planet, and returned to the Wind Dragon City. They heaved a sigh of relief only after they had safely returned. "Brother, I didn't expect that I would meet you here." Qi Fifan looked at Yi Shiwen. He was deeply moved. Yi Shiwen had been very lucky this time. It was merely Yi Shiwen's good fortune that had led him to the jackpot. And the enlightening mind ancient tree had recognized him as its master. Yi Shiwen had already transplanted that sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree inside the heavenly source mirror. Therefore, it had essentially become his private property. And his speed of comprehending the principles would increase very significantly with its assistance. "Even I hadn't anticipated that things would turn out like this." Yi Shiwen grinned. He hadn't anticipated that the enlightening mind ancient tree would unexpectedly choose him as its master. But it had momentarily seemed as if Yi Shiwen would get killed because of it, since Pang Yangbo and Young Master Feng were the only ones who had wanted to kill him before the start of this matter. But it eventually developed into a situation where his martial training was benefited. However, this enlightening mind ancient tree was the main culprit behind all of it. "Senior brother, I didn't hear any news about you after I entered the True Martial University. Which peak are you on?" Yi Shiwen asked. Qi Fifan explained everything to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen found out that Qi Fifan had coincidentally gained a great opportunity right after he had entered the True Martial University. And the Supreme Lord of the University had made him his last personal disciple. So, he had been undergoing closed-door training this entire time. Moreover, the genius who had become widely popular in the outside world by the name Great Radiant Senior was none other than Qi Fifan. Yi Shiwen suddenly figured it out. Qi Fifan had been chosen by the Supreme Lord to be his last disciple. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that his cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds in such a short time. The sheer amount and level of resources one could obtain by being the last disciple of the True Martial University's supreme leader was far beyond Yi Shiwen's imagination. This cultivation was like a bandit's dream. However, Yi Shiwen's cultivation had also advanced by leaps and bounds after he had entered the Hidden Star Peak. In fact, it had even gone far beyond Qi Fifan's expectation. Yi Shiwen felt like laughing out loud. People would be greatly amazed if they found out the origins of the Heavenly Phoenix body, the Great Radiant Senior Expert, and his. They would probably be surprised since many people might not have heard where Yuan's school was located. However, they might be scared to death if they would come to know that 3 Heaven's Pride experts had come from the Yuan school. "My reputation is mostly assisted by my identity as the last disciple of the Supreme Lord. It's far less thrilling than your world-shaking reputation. You have gained your name and fame by killing several Heaven's Pride experts. Chief Ifan looked at Yishiwen and said. Yishiwen was still the same as he used to in the Yuan school. He still couldn't tolerate any injustice. And he still couldn't eat the slightest loss either. After all, who could make him suffer defeat? In fact, the very thought of it was ridiculous. Most people to arrive at the true martial university hailed from different regions. So, they dealt with the others in a very cautious manner. Yishiwen was the only exception. He had earned a great reputation right after he had entered the true martial university. He had openly offended and dealt with law enforcement disciples. Most people couldn't even imagine doing something like that. For them, offending law enforcement disciples was akin to courting death. However, Yishiwen was still alive and healthy. But those who had gone against him hadn't met a good end. It wasn't surprising that many people privately called Yishiwen a calamity star since he caused people troubles wherever he went. Yishiwen had also heard about this bad reputation of his. However, he felt that he was being treated unjustly. He wouldn't have killed all those people if they hadn't come to kill him. He wasn't a homicidal maniac, or a devil that would kill people indiscriminately for no reason. What thrilling! I didn't have any other choice. Yishiwen laughed helplessly. He wouldn't have desired to build such world-shaking reputation if he had been given a choice. And he wouldn't willingly kill people in order to attain such world-shaking reputation. However, he had been left with no choice but to kill. He would have had a pleasant journey, and could have cultivated under favorable conditions if he could be like those other Heaven's Pride experts. And he wouldn't have to bother about a lot of other stuff. After all, who wants to make enemies all the time? However, there was no way out since he had already trod this path. There was no turning back. He could only overcome the obstacles and move forward. It just so happens that Sister Hua is also here. She's undergoing closed-door training. Yishiwen spoke up. But I don't know if she has come out or not in the last more than a year's time. Yishiwen had deliberately allowed her to stay in the Wind Dragon City since he had felt that taking her along might be risky. So, it was better to let her stay in the Wind Dragon City because it was guarded by the powerhouses of the Sage Realm. Let's go together! Chief Ifan laughed and said. These two individuals had come out from the Yuan school. Therefore, they had gotten even closer since they had come to the same true martial university. And they had involuntarily embraced each other as a group, just like the people of Qifeng Mountain had embraced each other as a group after they had arrived in Yuan school. They soon arrived at the inn where Yishiwen and Hua Menghan had lodged for undergoing closed-door training. They arrived and saw that Hua Menghan was arguing with a tall and handsome middle-aged man about something. Yishiwen felt a terrifying sense of danger from the aura being emitted from the body of that middle-aged man. A chill ran down his spine as a result. And his heart began to pound loudly. Yishiwen realized that he couldn't sense the depth of this man's power. Moreover, he hadn't even felt such a strong sense of danger from the body of a great sage expert. I'm telling you that I am a human, and not a member of your clan. Hua Menghan's face exposed a bit of anger. And her beautiful face had turned slightly red. But the blood of my race flows in your body. You can't deny this, no matter what. The man seemed to have ignored Hua Menghan's anger, as he replied in a solemn tone. I'm saying it for the last time, I'm not a member of your clan. And I won't go to the ancient Phoenix world with you. Hua Menghan angrily retorted. Her complexion had turned red. Ancient Phoenix world, Yishiwen's complexion immediately changed. He had heard Yemo speak of this world. Yemo had said that the dragon race and the phoenix race had once coexisted. But the folklore stated that these races had already vanished without any trace. However, a great majority of members of these races were living in seclusion. The dragon race was living in the true dragon world. And the phoenixes had chosen a world known as the ancient phoenix world to live in seclusion. It was said that an ancestor of the phoenix race had established a world for their people many ages ago. And this world was independent from the 10,000 worlds. So, nobody knew where this place was located. Yi Shiwen had merely considered this as hearsay, nothing more. He didn't take it seriously. He didn't care much either. The dragon world and the ancient phoenix world existed in fables alone as far as he was concerned. They were very far away from the bounds of his imagination. Damn! Yi Shiwen, this man isn't human! Emo suddenly uttered. This man is a phoenix, and he has merely taken a human form. Phoenix! Yi Shiwen was sent in extreme shock. He hadn't doubted the existence of the phoenixes. However, he hadn't anticipated that he would be able to see a phoenix one day, and that too in this way. Chi Fifin hadn't heard Yemo's voice. However, he could also feel the terrifying aura from the body of this man, and felt that it could make a person suffocate. In fact, one look from this man could suck one up into the bottomless abyss. One would then lose oneself and one's sense of reality. This was exceptionally dreadful. It's possible that the blood inside this girl's body has attracted this phoenix. Yemo continued. Humph! The blood of the heavenly phoenix! Who are you? That man suddenly shouted. Then, a horrifying sonic boom swept towards Yi Shiwen and Chi Fifin. It struck them, and sent them flying. They knocked against the entrance gate of the inn, and sent it flying. But the entire inn was empty. So, there was no one inside. It seemed as if the people had long been scared away. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt a strange stiffness in his chest. He spouted a mouthful of blood. And the look of horror was clearly visible in his eyes. That middle-aged man was far more powerful than his imagination. Hua Menghan reacted when she saw that Yi Shiwen and Chi Fifin had been sent flying. Yi Shiwen, brother Qi! Hua Menghan shouted in a startled manner. Her figure drew a long line of red flames as she arrived in front of those two. She then hastily asked, Are you two okay? We're fine. What's going on here? Yi Shiwen asked. He faintly had a premonition in his heart that something bad was going to happen. To be continued. Chapter 430. We are fine. What's going on here? Yi Shiwen asked. He faintly had a premonition in his heart that something bad was going to happen. That man looked arrogant. So, he didn't pay any attention to Yi Shiwen. Perhaps, Yi Shiwen wasn't qualified enough to demand his attention. He faintly said, Young man, there are some matters which you are better off not knowing. So, the less you know, the better it would be for you. And it would be better if you ask fewer questions unless you wish to disappear from this world. There are some matters which you'd better off not knowing. That man coldly warned. Yi Shiwen became furious. However, he didn't act rashly. He clearly knew the disparity between himself and that man. And it was like the difference between cloud and mud. Yi Shiwen was perhaps like an ant in the eyes of that man. I know you're not a human, but a phoenix. Yi Shiwen clenched his teeth. He stared firmly at that man as he spoke. That man's complexion changed abruptly. He hadn't expected that Yi Shiwen would know his identity, that he was a phoenix. And his killing intention rose as a result. Stop. Hua Menghan distinctly felt that man's killing intention rise. So, she immediately shouted at that man in order to stop him. I will kill myself right now if you dare to touch them. Then, you won't be able to obtain any blood whatsoever. That man's complexion changed significantly. He looked at Hua Menghan, and realized that she was determined. She wasn't kidding. And she might genuinely kill herself if he were to attack Yi Shiwen and Chi Fifin. That would obviously be a great loss for him. Therefore, he could only look bitterly at Yi Shiwen as he spoke. You're quite lucky, young man. The heavenly phoenix blood was very important for his clan. And he obviously knew that this might be the only opportunity to obtain the extinct heavenly phoenix blood. Moreover, the elders of his clan would blame him if he committed any mistake. So, he couldn't afford to commit such a grave mistake. Young Miss Hua, it doesn't matter whether you're willing or not. This matter has already alarmed the old elders of my race. So, there isn't any margin for turning this matter around. That man continued, I request you to understand the urgency of the desire my clan harbors for the heavenly phoenix blood. You will be able to attain the status of senior female saint in my clan if you willingly come with me. In fact, you will enjoy great benefits as long as you are willing to come with me, the man solemnly said. I don't want to. Hua Menghan gently bit her lower lip and replied. Yi Shiwen's heart was suddenly stirred up. He became frightened the moment he heard about Hua Menghan's departure. And he suddenly realized that she had an enormous position in his heart, a position that no one else could take. He merely had a vague feeling in the beginning. However, the words of this man had cut like a knife. And the intense feeling that resulted from this realization sobered him up. Yi Shiwen, the current situation isn't good. This girl's blood has caught the attention of the Phoenix race. So, they will surely take her away, Yemo said. The Heavenly Phoenix clan is the most respected clan among all the Phoenix clans. However, they vanished along with the disappearance of the Phoenix ancestor, and that had happened a long time ago. But the Phoenix race has been looking for the traces of possible leftover blood of Heavenly Phoenix clan in every world ever since. Phoenixes usually aren't as lascivious as the dragons, but they've also left their bloodline behind in various worlds. And these people have finally found this girl. So, how can they not take her away? She doesn't wish to go with you. So, why are you forcing her? Yi Shiwen glared at that man. He clenched his teeth and asked. Why, you ask? Some things don't need any reasons. This is fate. That man looked eerily at Yi Shiwen and said, It's just like you will never be able to access the entire world. And you can only struggle in this mortal world like an ant. And it's just like ants can't understand the vastness of the sky the way an eagle does. This is fate. But you don't deserve to know so much. The man had become somewhat impatient. And his terrifying imposing aura had completely shrouded Yi Shiwen. The bones inside Yi Shiwen's body made rattling sounds as they rubbed against each other. In fact, he couldn't even raise his head due to the immensity of this pressure. Fate? What fate? I don't believe in fate. I control my fate, not the heavens. Nobody can control my fate, Yi Shiwen shouted. His golden divinities began to surge on his body, and broke through the imposing pressure of that man's aura. Then, he slowly stood up. But his entire body was covered in sweat. He didn't believe in fate. He didn't believe that someone could dominate his life. He believed that his fate was in his own hands. Well, very nice. You're quite ambitious, but... That man coldly shouted. He then disappeared before Yi Shiwen's eyes. And he suddenly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen in the very next second, and pressed him down onto the ground with his palm. Bang! Yi Shiwen was nailed down to the ground in one slap. And the bones throughout his body had been shattered. Many people in the world can kill you since killing an ant isn't a difficult task. That man's voice was ice cold as he said this. His killing intention was boiling because he had realized that Hua Menghan liked this young man. Perhaps, he also possessed some affection for her. Therefore, the man didn't wish this kind of a situation. Looking at the present situation, it would be better if he could kill Yi Shiwen. Stop! Hua Menghan yelled. However, that man's killing intention had already risen. He brought his foot down in order to crush Yi Shiwen's head. And it seemed as if he would trample Yi Shiwen to death. Bang! An extremely terrifying power emerged out of Yi Shiwen's body. And a big furry hand instantly popped out from his body. It struck the sole of that man's foot with a bang, and grabbed it. Bang! The terrifying collision set off boundless energy waves, and they shattered the void to pieces. However, it couldn't blow the inn off since the inn was being protected by a powerful barrier. That man was shaken by the tremendous force, and hurriedly retreated. In fact, he retreated several steps, and a large chunk of void was shattered under his footsteps. He withdrew quite far away, and eventually came to a halt. But he was indefinitely bewildered as he looked at Yi Shiwen. However, he was surprised to see a huge specter emerging from Yi Shiwen's body. It was a ferocious-looking and exceptionally aggressive devil in reality. Its flaming aura soared high, and wasn't one bit inferior to that man's. How is a devil expert here? I'm Feng Ling, the patrolling inspector of the Phoenix race. I've been sent here to handle some matters. I hope your excellency won't interfere. That man, Feng Ling, looked at that specter indefinitely puzzled. I don't care about your Phoenix race's matters. I'm determined to protect these people. That senior specter opened his mouth and spoke. His voice made a rumbling sound. It was similar to that of a big bell. Get lost. Don't force me to attack. Otherwise, even the reputation of your Phoenix race won't be able to save you. Feng Ling shouted. It's impossible. You should be aware of the fact that even a single vein of Heavenly Phoenix's arteries is very important for our Phoenix race. Do you wish to wage a war between the Devil world and our ancient Phoenix world? If you really wish to protect them, then I won't have any other option but to fight with you till death. Feng Ling firmly replied. A flame began to ignite from his body. It then began to boil. You let them go. And I'll come with you. Hua Menghan looked sad, but she had spoken with determination. Young Miss Hua is ready to come with me. That's the best case. Feng Ling opened his mouth and said. He had wanted to kill Yi Shiwen to prevent him from divulging the secret. However, Hua Menghan had finally changed her decision. Moreover, that senior devil expert had also scared him since he could potentially be a very difficult opponent. Yi Shiwen. Hua Menghan looked at Yi Shiwen. This guy had raised his head for her sake. He was fully aware that he was no match for Feng Ling. However, he still stood up to him. He was really insane. Hua Menghan didn't know what to say. She was reluctant to leave. But she merely shot a glance at Yi Shiwen, turned around, and flew out of the window and trod on the rainbow light. She soon disappeared into the horizon. Feng Ling shot a quick glance at Yi Shiwen and said, You were lucky this time. You mustn't try to look for her. Otherwise, Hua Menghan won't be able to save you even if she personally steps in. Oh no, it seems that a human like you won't be able to know where to find her in your entire lifetime. Feng Ling's facial expression was brimming with arrogance. He had looked down on Yi Shiwen. Forget about indulging in a talk with Yi Shiwen. He would have mercilessly killed Yi Shiwen if that devil expert hadn't suddenly emerged out from Yi Shiwen's body. Feng Ling transformed into a group of flames after he had spoken those words, and flew out in the direction of Hua Menghan. He disappeared before everyone's eyes in no time. Yi Shiwen, what's going on? Chief Yifan was the most confused individual on the scene. And he was still in shock. He had just seen a phoenix, a race he had only heard about in the fables. Yi Shiwen had openly exposed that man's identity. And that man hadn't denied it either. However, his killing intention had risen greatly. So, how could Chief Yifan not have understood that Yi Shiwen's words had been true? He had never imagined that he would get to see a phoenix one day. The phoenix race was synonymous with tyrannical strength in the legends of this universe. However, they had disappeared countless years ago. It was often heard that someone had seen the birds and demon beasts that possessed the phoenix blood. However, the real phoenixes had disappeared, just like the real dragons. Hua Menghan had apparently inherited the most precious bloodline of the phoenix race. Chief Yifan suddenly recalled Hua Menghan's nickname out of the blue, Heavenly Phoenix Body. However, Chief Yifan was even more surprised by the fact that a devil expert had suddenly emerged out of Yi Shiwen's body. He was determined to believe that Yi Shiwen wasn't possessed by a devil. And Yi Shiwen hadn't shown any symptoms of it either. In fact, there wasn't any indication that he could transform into a devil. Yi Shiwen clenched his teeth. Then, he heaved a sigh of relief, and that huge specter faded away before his eyes. It disappeared without a trace. Only the voice of Yemo echoed in his ears. Yi Shiwen, that specter was my doing. It was only meant to scare him away. But you must leave quickly. It's possible that the Phoenix guy might come back to kill you. And I've overspent my energy in that sudden thrust. So, I'm going to lie dormant for some time to restore my energy. And you're on our own until I wake up. It turned out that the Devil Spectre was merely the result of Yemo's projection. And it was only designed to frighten the enemy, nothing more. It was completely harmless in reality. Its imposing aura was only useful in scaring a person. And it wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow in reality. To be continued. Chapter 431. Yishuin spouted a mouthful of impure energy after a few breaths' time. His bodily injuries had almost been repaired by now. The consequences would have been too horrible if Yemo hadn't acted on time. In fact, it was hard to imagine what could have happened since Yishuin didn't have any power to fight back against this man. Even Yemo had ended up falling into deep slumber after he had helped him. And it was uncertain when he'd wake up. Ancient Phoenix World. No matter where this place was, Yishuin would go to the ancient Phoenix World sooner or later, and he'd bring her back. Feng Ling. Yishuin had to go through this all because of him. So, he would make him pay back twice over in time. Yishuin had never felt so helpless. He didn't have enough strength. He didn't have anything. He was merely like a lump of meat that had been placed on the chopping board. Anyone could come and take him away. Even Hua Menghan was forced to sacrifice herself in order to save him. Moreover, Yemo had to fall into deep sleep for the sake of his life. Yishuin's former goal was to practice unceasingly and grow stronger. But his main goal had suddenly shifted to the ancient Phoenix World. And he would find this place sooner or later. Yishuin secretly vowed in his heart. And he firmly clenched his fists. In fact, his fingertips deeply pinched into his palm, and blood flowed out. However, he seemed totally oblivious to it. "Brother, are you okay?" Chief Ifan became worried, and asked as soon as he saw Yishuin. The incident that had taken place hadn't been directed at him. However, he had also survived because of Hua Menghan's sacrifice alone. So, he too felt extremely aggrieved in his heart. However, he didn't wish to see Yishuin in a depressed state. Otherwise, what would be the point of Hua Menghan's sacrifice? "I'm fine. Let's go!" Yishuin finally opened his mouth and replied. Then, he stood up. His voice was dull, and his expression was strangely tranquil enough to scare a person. "It's not safe here. There's no guarantee that Feng Ling won't come back to attack us." Chief Ifan nodded. He had become even more anxious after he saw Yishuin like this. It would be better if Yishuin could vent out his frustration. "Brother, don't be sad. Sister Hua would feel bad if she were to see you like this." Yishuin grinned. "I'm fine. This ancient Phoenix World is nothing. I will smash it to pieces one day, and I'll bring her back then." "Good, this is what a true man of the Yuan school would say." Chief Ifan applauded. He heaved a sigh of relief as he heard Yishuin's words. The thing that he was most worried about, fortunately, didn't happen after all. "Brother, let's return to the university." Yishuin had a firm look in his eyes. He would walk to the top, step by step, even if the ancient Phoenix World were to be located above the ninth heaven. He would become a great sage if the sage realm wasn't enough. This martial arts competition had also taken place in the past. And all the Heaven's Pride experts had participated in it at that time. And all of them had been killed as a result. But everyone had learned from that experience. So, the forces wouldn't allow the entirety of their Heaven's Pride experts, or all of the elite disciples, to participate in this competition at once. According to the rules, the four forces would host a martial arts competition alternatively. And it was the true martial university's turn this time around. Therefore, Yishuin didn't need to go to any other place ahead of time. None of the major forces dared to look down on this time's martial arts competition. It could by and large be said that this competition among the new disciples would determine the relative power of these forces for a quite long period of time in the future. However, a disciple of some force might emerge as an outstanding genius by defeating the others in this event. And a war might get sparked among the forces in the future as a result. Yishuin didn't say anything after he returned to the true martial university. He merely isolated himself inside his room, and started his closed-door training. Qififan knew about the pain in Yishiwen's heart. However, he didn't have any words to remonstrate it right now. Day by day, time passed, while Yishiwen underwent the closed-door training. And the day of the martial arts competition among the four forces finally arrived. True Martial University was already a lively place. But it had suddenly become even more crowded. Everyone was excited. This martial arts competition was going to take place between four forces. So, the people of these four forces had obviously arrived here. However, several people of many other big forces had also arrived to watch this event and examine their strength. This event would also reveal the muscles of these four forces to the outside world. But most importantly, it would reveal their strengths to each other. The more outstanding the performance of their disciples, the higher their evaluation would be. Moreover, this event was also a means to deter other people from casually resorting to rise against their position of power. Streamers of lights of different colors landed in the true martial university. The representatives of various forces, especially the representatives of the other three forces, arrived one by one in big groups. Many elders of the true martial university had come out in order to welcome the guests. They showed great importance to the visitors on the one hand, but they also deterred the possible misconduct of errant people on the other hand. Brother Yi has been undergoing closed-door training for such a long time. Why he hasn't come out yet? Deng Shui Xian seemed somewhat anxious as she looked at the place wherein Yishiwen was undergoing the closed-door training. Yang Wenjun stood beside her, but he looked rather comfortable. He wasn't worried at all. The two of them had finally entered the sage realm after a few years of non-stop practice. In fact, they had recently come out of their closed-door training. Their innate talent was a bit inferior to that of Bai Jiansong's and the others in Hidden Star Peak. However, they were rare geniuses in their merit. Moreover, they had the accumulation the worth of over 100 years. And their improvement hadn't been minor after they had obtained the complete version of the Hidden Star Scripture. In fact, they had stepped into the semi-sage realm in one fell swoop. Both of them were in the sage realm now, and had been promoted to the rank of core disciples. Therefore, there was a difference of heaven and earth between their current status and their status of the past. Therefore, they were especially grateful to Yishiwen. They might have had to try for countless years to reach to this level if it hadn't been for Yishiwen's contribution. There was no problem with their accumulation of energy. The main problem was that they didn't have the complete version of their core cultivation method. They were forced to be very careful at every step of their cultivation in the past. Therefore, their progress rate had been much slower than other people. However, their accumulation and foundation were very profound. So, they would have advanced by leaps and bounds if they had proper cultivation method from the beginning. They had also heard that Qififan and Yishiwen had returned together. And Qififan had told them about Hua Menghan's matter. He didn't speak of what had come to happen between Hua Menghan and Yishiwen in a clear manner. However, it was enough to let these two know that Yishiwen's present situation wasn't quite good. He needed time to adjust his mental state. Relax. Brother Yi has always been a strong person. So, this level of mental shock shouldn't be a problem for him, Yang Wenjun said. Yishiwen had joined this peak only a few years ago. However, he knew that Yishiwen was an exceptionally strong person. He wasn't the type of person who would weep endlessly. But the martial arts competition between the four forces will start soon. So, he would miss this competition if he doesn't come out of his closed-door training, Deng Shui Xian said. Let him miss it if he wants to. It doesn't matter whether he goes to this martial arts competition or not. Yang Wenjun had perceived it well. This martial arts competition was a good opportunity for an average disciple to become famous. However, did Yishiwen really need to make a name for himself? He didn't. In fact, he had always been eager to keep a low-key profile so that he could avoid the unwanted attentions of other people. Creak! The door of the room, where Yishiwen was undergoing the closed-door training, opened. And a figure made its way out through that door. The two of them turned their gazes, and saw that it was Yishiwen. However, they were surprised to see that Yishiwen was beaming with life. In fact, there weren't any depressed expressions on his face. It seemed as if nothing had happened. "Come on! Let's go and participate in the martial arts competition. Hurry up, or we will miss it!" Yishiwen spoke up as he clenched his fists. His journey to the top was going to begin with this martial arts competition. Whoosh! 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 The melodious ringing sound of a big bell reverberated. It penetrated the endless skies and spread throughout the true martial university. With this, everyone knew that the martial arts competition had finally begun. To be continued. Chapter 432. The loud ringing sound of the bell announced the beginning of this time's martial arts competition. The venue of the competition was located at Metropolis Martial Peak. This peak was also one of the top 10 inheritances of the true martial university. In fact, the current Supreme Lord of the university belonged to this inheritance. In fact, it had always been the center of attraction since the beginning. Nearly all of the previous Supreme Lords in the history of the true martial university had come from this inheritance. It was the Supreme Colossus inheritance among the top 10 big inheritances. The venue was going to be inside a microcosm located at Metropolis Martial Peak. It wouldn't be carried out in the real world. After all, the experts of the semi-sage realm, or above, would be clashing and attacking frequently during the course of this competition. They might not be able to destroy the Metropolis Martial Peak if the competition were to be allowed in the real world. However, it certainly wouldn't be a pretty sight. But no one would need to hold back when fighting in this microcosm. And they could unleash their strongest attacks with any worry. It had been a few years since Yishiwen had arrived at the true martial university. However, he had only heard the name of Metropolis Martial Peak. He hadn't visited it till now. The true martial university was extremely vast. Perhaps it wouldn't take too much time to fly past it. However, it would take a hell lot of time to visit the places one by one. Most people couldn't visit every place inside the true martial university in their lifetime. The day of the martial arts competition had arrived, and it wouldn't be an understatement to say that a sea of people had arrived here for the event. Millions of people who hailed from true martial university had arrived at the Metropolis Martial Peak to watch this time's martial arts competition. And these spectators wanted to enter this microcosm in order to watch the fights. There was a magnificent and grand tall stage in the center of the venue, and it was shrouded in clouds and mist. People couldn't see anything clearly inside. This place was meant for the high-level experts of the major forces who had arrived here to watch the competition among the new disciples. Yishiwen got to the true depths of Metropolis Martial Peak, and came to know what a real sea of people looks like. The end line of the crowd wasn't visible. However, several spectators proceeded to the microcosm to take their seats as the time for the start of the competition gradually drew closer. The atmosphere soon became cold and calm as everyone waited for the 10,000 disciples who would take part in the competition. Yishiwen began to ascend the flight of stone steps. He saw several disciples who had arrived to take part in the competition on his way. They all seemed very excited. Everyone was hoping to become famous in one fell swoop in this time's competition. They wanted to stand out among their peers. And they wanted to become famous in the younger generation. In addition, there were many benefits as well. Let alone the other precious rewards, there was a heavy reward of primary spirit dawn. One could get a reward of 1,000 primary spirit dawn in the first round. The second round had a reward of 2,000 primary spirit dawn. The reward would keep doubling with each successive round. And the winner of the competition would get a reward of 1,000,000 primary spirit dawn. This was an astronomical figure for anyone. It could be said that one could suddenly become a Heaven's Pride expert if they would succeed in standing out in this time's competition. Therefore, this was a second chance for those people who had already decided in advance to become a Heaven's Pride expert right after they had entered the true martial university. One could get the attention of the university's high-level experts if they performed well here. They might even overtake the former Heaven's Pride experts in the future if they would put their efforts into training and cultivation. This kind of thing had occurred many times in the past. Even Yi Shiwen had secretly become speechless. It could be said that the true Martial University was bleeding money this time. The university had previously awarded him with merely 100,000 primary spirit dawn to show his importance after he had killed the second god. But they were now distributing millions of primary spirit dawn in one fell swoop. It could be said that they were spending a massive amount of money. Moreover, the primary spirit dawn were rather insignificant stuff compared to the other rewards. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that so many disciples were so excited to stand out in order to gain both fame and fortune. Even Yi Shiwen had also become somewhat excited, and clenched his fists. Just you wait, Sister Hua. I will advance step by step, and come to bring you back, even if I have to go to the ends of the earth. This is just the first step. Yi Shiwen knew his capability. He knew that he was quite good at present. However, he also knew that he was no better than an ant in comparison to those genuinely strong people. So, he could only continue to fight and practice with a break in order to stand out among his peers, and to obtain the true Martial University's acknowledgement. He could progress faster, and go farther if he had the resources of the true Martial University at his disposal. There were several hundred roads which could lead to the top of the mountain. Yi Shiwen had chosen one of them. Everyone here was a top-notch expert. They had already reached halfway to the metropolis Martial Peak in such a short period of time. A loud and clear laughter suddenly came through from around the corner when everyone was about to move ahead. And that wild laughter echoed throughout the sky. Ha ha ha! It seems like the true Martial University is full of mediocre people. Xian Yuan Palace Hall's Ling Yuan is here to ask for advice. Isn't there anyone who can teach me a thing or two? His loud and clear voice suddenly echoed everywhere, since it also contained real elemental energy along with it. The complexions of several disciples of the true Martial University immediately turned ugly. But the disciples of other forces present in the surrounding were amused as they looked at the disciples of the true Martial University. They even sniggered up their sleeves, especially the disciples of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall. They were beaming with joy. Yi Shiwen's countenance was calm. He picked up pace, and went further up. He soon arrived at big piece of land at the corner. And he saw a 20-year-old young man clad in a white robe standing there. He looked arrogant and overbearing. He was standing in the middle of the road to obstruct the path of the disciples of the true Martial University. The complexions of hundreds of disciples of the true Martial University had turned ugly when they saw this young man standing before their eyes. This was provocation. Moreover, it was a blunt provocation. He had dared to wander into the true Martial University's territory, and had pulled a stunt like this therein. His courage was quite extraordinary. Moreover, he had blocked the way of the disciples of the true Martial University. So, wasn't this stunt obviously directed at the true Martial University? Several disciples of the true Martial University lay upside down on the ground. They were groaning and screaming endlessly. The experts of the Legendry's great complete realm, and even an expert of the intermediate stage of semi-sage realm, had been slammed to the ground in just one slap. The remaining hundreds of disciples of the true Martial University had begun to hesitate because of this. An expert of the intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm had been sent flying in just one slap. What could these people possibly do? Yi Shiwen looked. That Ling Yuan was an expert of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. He had condensed 900 Tao principles. So, he wasn't one bit beneath that deceased young Master Feng. Basically, he was only a bit weaker than some of the Heaven's Pride experts. So, it wasn't very surprising that he was courageous enough that he had dared to intercept them at the halfway point to the mountain top. This was a ruthless attempt to lower the face of the true Martial University. Moreover, the true Martial University's reputation would decline in front of so many forces. And these people could only watch this, but there was nothing they could do about it. Moreover, they were unable to go up the stairs. Some people wanted to take the other road to reach to the top of the mountain, but there was a possibility of getting obstructed again. Moreover, they might arrive late, and may get disqualified as a result. And that would be a big loss for them. The true Martial University had many experts. However, the problem was that it seemed as if there was no one on this road who could compete with Ling Huiyuan. And the experts of the older generation couldn't interfere because that would be considered as bullying the junior. And this would decrease their reputation big time. They would lose their face even if they got rid of Ling Huiyuan. This was a typical example of a small fight with big outcome. The true Martial University couldn't afford to lose its face at any cost. There would have been no problem if he had only obstructed a path without targeting anyone. Everyone would have considered it as a joke, and would have laughed it off. The true Martial University indeed had many experts. However, it would be very disgraceful for the true Martial University's younger generation if the experts of the older generation were forced to move into action. Is there no one in this big true Martial University who can teach me a thing or two? This is very disappointing. Ling Huiyuan deliberate put on a pitiful look on his face as he said. Yi Shiwen looked at Ling Huiyuan and sneered. This young man looked insolent and arrogant. However, he was quite cunning in reality. Several Heaven's Pride experts had already arrived at the venue early morning. So, the disciples present here right now weren't the elite crowd. Moreover, there were only a few hundred disciples present on this road. So, there was a very small probability of him coming across a Heaven's Pride expert. His strength was quite tyrannical. In fact, nobody could be his opponent unless they were a Heaven's Pride expert. In fact, it could be said that his strength of 900 Tao principles was enough to deal with a Heaven's Pride expert, and escape if necessary. Therefore, he didn't need to be afraid as long as the disciples of the older generation didn't interfere. This Ling Huiyuan is too arrogant and despotic. It is said that he enjoys a very good reputation in the Xianyuan Palace Hall. Many people have said that he's capable of becoming a Heaven's Pride expert. Look at this strength. He's not a Heaven's Pride expert, but he isn't far off either. He's extremely fierce. Why isn't he looking for those Heaven's Pride experts? You know, he's just embarrassing us. The Xianyuan Palace Hall can only play cheap tricks like this. This is extremely hateful. Most of the disciples around Yi Shiwen were exceptionally angry. Young man, you mustn't act too arrogantly. A figure leapt up from the crowd of disciples. He had stood behind Yi Shiwen. It was an expert of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. He had condensed 700 Tao principles. You're not my opponent! Ling Huiyuan merely shook his head. He simply didn't pay any attention to this expert of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Humph! Less empty talk, and more action! That expert of the late stage of semi-sage realm rushed forward. A boundless energy wave swept out with him. He fired his punch. It carried boundless fist energy. The fist energy then distorted altogether, and condensed into a long dragon. And it advanced towards Ling Huiyuan to attack him. The faces of the disciples of the true Martial University simultaneously exposed bright smiles. It's brother He Xinhong of the Peaceful Water Peak. There should be no problem now. Yeah, brother He Xinhong has always been strong. He can be considered at the top among the experts who are ranked right below the Heaven's Pride experts. Yi Shiwen heard this, and felt that this name sounded somewhat familiar. This man was apparently a well-known figure among the younger generation, and possessed incredible strength. However, Yi Shiwen shook his head and said, No. He Xinhong is indeed powerful. However, there's a big difference between the strengths of both parties. The keen gazes of Yi Shiwen and the others fell on He Xinhong to read his power. He was certainly powerful. However, there was clearly a big disparity between him and Ling Huiyuan. However, the disciples of the true Martial University who were beside Yi Shiwen became somewhat furious as they heard what Yi Shiwen had spoken, since they found their own prestige and vigor extinguishing in front of the enemy's rising power. Ling Huiyuan sneered as Yi Shiwen's voice faded away. He suddenly trod forward, and went all out, like a fierce tiger. He shot his palm. And it swept out like a gigantic hand. It crushed He Xinhong's offensive in a flash. It had struck and broken that powerful fist energy. And He Xinhong went flying in just one slap. A severe light then flickered in Ling Huiyuan's eyes. And the other palm went towards He Xinhong's dantian to destroy his martial cultivation. To be continued. Chapter 433. Ling Huiyuan charged on fiercely. He had destroyed He Xinhong's dantian in a slap. A sinister look flashed on his face. He might give an excuse later on, that he had done it by mistake, and then avoid any trouble for it. Blades and swords have no eyes in the martial arts competition's battles. This is an unavoidable fact. He might not have launched an attack on some average person. However, He Xinhong had made him feel threatened. He Xinhong obviously wasn't a match for him. However, he was regarded as a skilled expert in the true martial university. So, this had been the best opportunity to get rid of even one of their good experts. True martial university is just for show. It seems to enjoy an undeserved reputation. Ling Huiyuan laughed wildly after he saw that he was about to succeed in his plan to belittle the true martial university. Arrogant and despotic, these two words appeared in everyone's mind. Even those barbarians of Muddy Sky Island and Fire Cloud Cave who had eagerly waited to see the mockery of the true martial university felt that Ling Huiyuan was far too arrogant and despotic. The true martial university had an illustrious fame. It had ruled the entire true martial world at one point of time in the past. Even the Lord of Xianyuan Palace Hall wouldn't dare to say that the true martial university enjoyed an undeserved reputation. True martial university enjoys an undeserved reputation? Humph! Humph! Your bloated tone is as empty as a toad's yawn. A loud shout resounded. Then, a big golden hand swept towards Ling Huiyuan to crush him. This big hand set off boundless gales. It seemed as if it would crush the world as it pressed down. The space in the vicinity of the metropolis martial peak had been strengthened countless times. So, it was quite difficult even for the attack of a great sage expert to rip apart this space. However, this attack was incomparably dreadful. Ling Huiyuan promptly led off He Xinhong, and retreated frantically. In fact, he had retreated hundreds of feet at a quick pace. Rumble! That big hand crashed on top of the mountain. And it opened a crack on this road. The might it carried was simply endless. The extremely arrogant Ling Huiyuan's face exposed a somewhat frightened and doubtful look. He was astonished as he looked in Yi Shiwen's direction. He shouted, "Who are you?" The others also looked one after another. They wanted to find out who had actually forced a top expert like Ling Huiyuan to retreat. Ling Huiyuan wasn't a Heaven's Pride expert. However, he was a quasi-ranked character of Heaven's Pride level. In fact, not all Heaven's Pride experts would be able to deal with him. However, that big hand had forced him to retreat. Such was the strength it had carried. Could it be that it was an attack from some expert of the older generation? "It's me!" Yi Shiwen faintly spoke up. He stepped out with large strides, and coldly looked at Ling Huiyuan. Everyone was dumbstruck to see Yi Shiwen, whether they were the disciples of the true martial university, Muddy Sky Island, or Fire Cloud Cave. Who in the world was this man? A Heaven's Pride expert. His one slap had forced Ling Huiyuan to retreat, just one slap, nothing more. The entire mountainside had suddenly turned exceptionally quiet. It was literally pin-drop silence. Most people had only seen the slim back profile of Yi Shiwen. Who is this guy? How did a ferocious guy like Ling Huiyuan have no choice but to retreat under his attack? Haven't most of the Heaven's Pride experts of the true martial university rushed to the venue already? Who is this man? Can he be a new expert who has recently risen to fame? Yi Shiwen, he's Yi Shiwen! The experts of the true martial university finally recognized Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had made a lot of noise in these past few years. He had been relentless, one incident after another. Each of these incidents had baffled people. Yi Shiwen's appearance hadn't been a secret. It's just that he had kept his aura restrained by using the restraining breath technique. Therefore, It had basically been impossible for people to sense Yishuin's presence after he had deliberately restrained his aura. Such was his skill and efficiency. He could literally brush past them like a gust of wind, without getting undetected. They hadn't been able to notice him because his presence was quite faint until now. However, they had finally recognized him now. "Who are you? Are you also a disciple of the true martial university?" Ling Huiyuan shouted. "Using a sneak attack like that was an extremely shameless act. Are all the disciples of your true martial university cheap like you?" Ling Huiyuan asked as he measured his words under the pretense of righteousness. However, he didn't see any disgust in the expressions of the disciples of the true martial university, as he had expected to. On the contrary, he saw happy expressions on their faces. In fact, he saw expressions of schadenfreude on their faces. They are taking pleasure in others' misfortune? What the hell is happening here? He's finished. This idiot is done for. Yeah, this idiot has messed up by being arrogant and cocky. Too bad he has messed with the wrong person. Ha ha. This thick iron wall will mess him up for messing with him. Indeed. Yishuin is the strongest Heaven's Pride expert in the younger generation of the true martial university. The disciples of the true martial university burst into laughter one after another, and commented in ridiculing tones. They hadn't expected Ling Huiyuan to be reduced to such a dejected and angry state a moment ago. However, they were getting to ridicule him publicly at this moment. Who was Yishuin? The people of the other forces might not know too much about him. However, the disciples of the true martial university knew him very well. This man was the most troublesome person in the true martial university. How could they not have seen how he had slaughtered the senior disciples of Law Enforcement Hall, that too on his very first day after he had entered the true martial university? Had they not seen how he had single-handedly messed up the disciples of the War Dead Star Peak after they had dared to blockade the Hidden Star City? Moreover, this wasn't the most important fact on Yishuin's list of merits. The fact that Yishuin had slaughtered 2 Heaven's Pride level experts in the past had boosted the confidence of this pack of disciples of the true martial university. One among those experts was Fang Ming, and the other one was the second god. Yishuin was truly the strongest man in the younger generation. Ling Huiyuan could at best retreat while facing a Heaven's Pride expert. But how would he face the man who had slaughtered, not just 1, but 2 Heaven's Pride exerts? He had messed with the wrong person. This could be considered as the biggest misfortune of his life. These people obviously didn't know that Yishuin had killed several Heaven's Pride experts, and hundreds of elites on that Wind Dragon's planet. Otherwise, they might have been scared to death. Strongest Heaven's Pride expert. Iron Wall? Yishuin was a bit depressed after he heard this evaluation. Cheap? Do you think that you have the right to speak about others? Yishuin sneered and walked over. Do you know what place this is? Who owns this place? This is the true martial university. You dared to make a big fuss thinking that nobody from our true martial university can tidy you up. Isn't that right? You are really a moron since you thought that you could lower the reputation of our true martial university by pulling such a lame stunt. Yishuin sneered. I flung that big slap on you to warn you to not act too arrogantly. Wasn't the other person more arrogant and troublesome than Yishuin? Yishuin hadn't wished for this. However, he had come across several challenges after he had entered the true martial university, whether big or small, and had advanced through them to reach here. Therefore, he had already caused several troubles. Yishuin's strong voice faded, and he swept out a big palm towards Ling Huiyuan. Yishuin's palm was wrapped in golden threads. It instantaneously arrived in front of Ling Huiyuan to kill him. The fight had broken out in that very moment. Yishuin had attacked without giving any warning. His attack had sent sonic booms in all directions, even though he hadn't exerted the entirety of his strength. Ling Huiyuan wanted to dodge the attack. However, it seemed as if he had lost his determination to avoid the attack in that very moment. Yishuin had moved extremely quickly. He had appeared in front of Ling Huiyuan within the blink of an eye. Bang! Ling Huiyuan was sent flying by one big slap. His body span in midair at a great speed due to the great force. Then, he heavily smashed down on the ground. Puff! Ling Huiyuan was messed up badly. He spouted a mouthful of blood as his teeth fell out. Yi Shiwen hadn't used his entire strength. His skull would have been smashed if that had been the case. Life or death didn't matter in the arena, but Yi Shiwen couldn't kill him here, even under the guise of a mistake. This slap was to teach you to behave with integrity, and not act too arrogantly. Yi Shiwen sneered. There will always be someone more arrogant than you. Yi Shiwen didn't mind being labeled as arrogant by other people. However, he was compelled to take up the challenge this time. He and this arrogant, cocky guy weren't same. He didn't care about what kind of hatred the true Martial University and Xianyuan Palace Hall possessed for each other. However, he wouldn't just sit idly while someone would bully others before him. Yi Shiwen passed from Ling Huiyuan's side after he was done speaking. He then walked up towards the top of the mountain step by step. Everyone was astonished. They were left in shock as they saw this scene in front of their eyes. Even the disciples of the true Martial University hadn't anticipated that the situation would turn like this. They felt that Ling Huiyuan had messed with the wrong person. However, they hadn't thought that Yi Shiwen would use a mere slap to crush his arrogance and temperament. It was a very neat slap. That extremely tyrannical Ling Huiyuan was no better than the opponents whom Yi Shiwen had defeated previously. Defeated in one move. Everyone was kind of scared. A chill ran inside their bodies. Was this the true strength of a Heaven's Pride expert? Ling Huiyuan, who was known to be a quasi-Heaven's Pride expert, couldn't even stop one move, and had been sent flying. Everyone was convinced that he would have died in just one slap if Yi Shiwen had used his full strength. How could they ever accomplish their goal of distinguishing themselves when such a person was around? However, the majority of people weren't ambitious for the top position. They knew the limits of their own strengths quite clearly. Yi Shiwen didn't care about how terrified everyone behind him was. He went straight to the hilltop. Tables had been arranged in rows on the top of the mountain. A group of the elders of the true Martial University were seated in the front row. They were in charge of distributing tokens to the participants. Everyone had to draw out a token by themselves. One would go to different locations, and would fight with their opponents based on the token drawn. Yi Shiwen drew out a token. He looked at the number, 3,500. It wasn't a forward position. Other disciples also reached to the top of the mountain in succession, soon after Yi Shiwen did. The time for the beginning of the martial arts competition had soon arrived. Ding dong! The loud sound of the bell reverberated through the sky. A figure came down flying from above the tall stage. He was tall. He was clad in a magnificent robe. He carried an incomparably noble aura around himself. However, his face wasn't visible clearly. He was True Martial University's Supreme Lord. He was the one in charge of countless disciples of the True Martial University. The True Martial University had conducted the martial arts competition this time. Therefore, the Supreme Lord had personally arrived to preside over the overall situation. Yi Shiwen looked at him. However, he couldn't see through his strength. It was said that the Supreme Lord had already surpassed the Great Sage Realm. Yi Shiwen had inquired about it from Qi Fifan. However, Qi Fifan told him that he didn't know either. He hadn't met the Supreme Lord often, even though he had been appointed as the last disciple of the man. Therefore, he couldn't guess the real strength of the Supreme Lord. However, Yi Shiwen could somewhat tell based on his last few years of experience in the True Martial University, that faintly discernible aura present on the body of the Supreme Lord wasn't like the oppressive aura of Great Sage Realm. To be continued. Chapter 434. I hereby announce the official beginning of this time's martial arts competition between the four forces. Countless doves flashed in the sky along with the official announcement of the Supreme Lord. Several microcosms, which would be used as venues for the martial arts contests, appeared one after another. Those tokens were the keys to enter the microcosms. A participant could enter the corresponding microcosm with the token in his hand. Suddenly, the disciples let out gigantic clamors. There were more than 10,000 participants this time. Each of the four major forces had contributed 1/4 of the total number. The weakest among these disciples were the experts of Legendary's great complete realm. In fact, Yishuin used to be in this realm a few years ago. And they weren't one bit inferior to how he used to be back then. Their foundation looked deep and profound. Their auras had been fluctuating on their bodies in the beginning, but had then exploded to unleash an incredible power. One could actually sense the traces of semi-sage level power mixed in their auras. Yishuin moved forward with the token in his hand. He then entered the microcosm that corresponded to his token. He glanced around. It wasn't a big microcosm. It was stretched up to 10 miles. However, it still had more than enough area to spare as an arena meant for a martial arts competition. Yishuin found out that his opponent had already arrived there. It was a young man, approximately 20 years old. He looked arrogant. He insipidly looked at Yishuin and said, "I'm unleashing of Muddy Sky Island. I suggest you surrender now. Otherwise, don't blame me for using my ruthless methods later." He was very arrogant. He had already at the late stage of the semi-sage realm. He had condensed more than 700 Tao principles. So, he was certainly very strong. In fact, he might have broken through several rounds quite easily if he didn't come across any Heaven's Pride expert. "You sound rather overconfident," Yishuin insipidly replied. "Haven't you heard of me?" Unleashing asked in a surprised manner. It was obvious that he just didn't seem to care about Yishuin. Many participants would investigate about the relatively famous experts in such a big competition. Some would even try to look into the top 500 experts. They would compile a big list that contained all the information about them. And several people would investigate about them in advance in order to win every battle. This was the so-called know thyself and know your enemy. Moreover, it wasn't a tough task even for the experts of Legendary's great complete realm to remember the details about hundreds of people. In fact, it was a task as easy as drinking water or eating food. This information had been traveling around for quite some time now. So, anyone could check these details as long as they possessed a little bit of intelligence. It wasn't a difficult task. Unleashing's name was listed in the list of top 200 experts. Wouldn't successfully breaking through several rounds be as simple as eating and drinking for him? In fact, he might even be able to do it with little to no effort. He believed that it was benevolent of him to allow the opponent to surrender with dignity. However, the man present before him didn't seem to appreciate his kindness. "Who are you? Why should I know you?" Yishuin replied. He had come out of the closed door training a while ago. So, he hadn't gotten the time to check the details about the top experts and Heaven's Pride experts. It anyway didn't make any difference to him. He could deal with anyone as per his current strength. So, what know yourself and know your enemies? He considered these sayings to be nonsensical. Unleashing's face turned red with embarrassment. Yishuin had landed a slap in his face when he was being complacent. He could feel the painful heat of that slap on his face. In fact, it was even more painful than a direct defeat. "Ha ha ha, this is so much fun. I was right about choosing to watch Yishuin's fight. His opponent is unknowingly sitting on a barrel of gunpowder. This is so amusing. This unleashing is flaunting in front of Yishuin. He doesn't realize that he has messed with the wrong person this time." Several disciples saw this scene and burst into laughter, especially the disciples of the true martial university. They knew that Yishuin wasn't a good person to mess with. Even the Heaven's Pride experts weren't his match, let alone this guy. "Bastard, you are courting death!" Unleashing's rage was enough to burn the vault of the heaven. He could feel the angst of being looked down upon. When was he ignored like this by any person? Even the Heaven's Pride experts hadn't dared to disregard his presence like this. Yishuin coldly looked at Unleashing. This youngster possessed excellent strength. However, he was far inferior to Yishuin. "You will regret this. I will break each one of your bones, one by one." Unleashing was burning with anger. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes, and killing intention flashed in his eyes. So you will break my bones one by one? Let's see whether you have the skill or not. Yi Shiwen sneered. Clang! And Li Qing brandished his long sword. An endless sword intention flew across the vast sky. The sword's pressure spread in all directions. And the long sword in his hand transformed into a long dragon, and swept towards Yi Shiwen, as if to devour him. Yi Shiwen sneered and attacked. But it wasn't some splendid move. He had merely brandished his palm as a ferocious slap. Rumble! The surrounding space was shattered by the attacks of these two individuals. Yi Shiwen remained entirely still. However, and Li Qing went flying by the blast. It's impossible! And Li Qing looked at Yi Shiwen unbelievably. Yi Shiwen had remained motionless, and had casually welcomed his attack. This shouldn't be possible, even for a Heaven's Pride expert. Yi Shiwen finally moved at this time. He suddenly trod forward. He was all alone, but his imposing aura seemed to carry the might of a magnificent army with thousands of men and horses. His powerful aura seethed, and swept all across. The golden divinities were wrapped around Yi Shiwen's palm. He then pounded his palm on Li Qing's chest at a lightning speed. Bang! Li Qing didn't have the strength to withstand this attack. And he was sent flying by Yi Shiwen's slap. The bones in his chest were broken in their entirety. He spouted a mouthful of blood, and fell unconscious. Even his token fell down from his hand, and rolled away. Yi Shiwen had won in one move. How could this be? This is impossible! The spectators who had taken note of this battle were in complete uproar. They couldn't believe their eyes. Nobody knew Yi Shiwen apart from the disciples of the true martial university. Therefore, they were quite optimistic about Li Qing. They believed that Li Qing could hold his own with dignity even while facing a Heaven's Pride expert. However, he couldn't even withstand one move from this man. How's this possible? Who is this man? How he can be so powerful? Is he a Heaven's Pride expert? Don't you know him? He is Yi Shiwen, our true martial university's famous Heaven's Pride expert. A disciple of the true martial university proudly spoke up. He is Yi Shiwen! Everyone exclaimed with amazement. Yi Shiwen was a low-key man in comparison to other Heaven's Pride experts, but he was usually a part of high-profile matters. He was usually involved in matters that had caused sensations everywhere. However, he was basically reclusive behavior-wise, unlike other Heaven's Pride experts. Many disciples who had taken part in this competition knew about him. However, it was very rare for outsiders to recognize him. Several disciples of other forces were present in the surroundings. And the disciples of the Muddy Sky Island were particularly optimistic about their own expert. Who would have thought that he would come across a calamity star like Yi Shiwen in the very first round? Just one slap had left him to lose consciousness. It would have been fine if it had turned into fierce struggle between the two. But they simply couldn't endure such an outcome. The complexions of the disciples of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall had turned even uglier than theirs. Their faces had turned as ashen as the facial expression of a dead housefly. Yi Shiwen had just defeated a disciple of the Muddy Sky Island. However, he had killed a Heaven's Pride expert of theirs. So, they felt more pain and discomfort when they saw Yi Shiwen happy. True Martial University's Yi Shiwen is the winner of this fight. Yi Shiwen suddenly heard a majestic voice. It was the voice of an elder. Yi Shiwen came out of the microcosm once he heard the judgment. Then, he appeared above the public square of Metropolis Martial Peak post his exit from the other space. The loser of the match was taken to some other place. This area was for the winners, so that they could enjoy the attentions of thousands of people. Of course, only winners deserved such treatment. The number of audience was quite less this time. Only a few spectators had arrived since the competition had just begun. The fights would last long only if there wasn't a big difference in the strengths of the contenders. Otherwise, they would be like Yi Shiwen's fight in which they take down their opponent in just one move. The first round wasn't too difficult. There was hardly any pressure on the experts of the semi-sage realm, unless they were extremely unlucky like in leeching. But everything was dependent on luck for the experts of Legendary's great complete realm. They might get through if they came across a weak opponent. However, they could easily get eliminated if they were to come across a stronger opponent. Yi Shiwen! Suddenly, a somewhat familiar voice sounded from behind. Yi Shiwen turned around. He saw a figure clad in green clothes. A woman arrived wandering around with a faint smile on her face. She turned out to be one of the 4 pro-disciples of Yuan school. It was Shuiyan Luo. Sister Shui! Yi Shiwen hadn't thought that he would come across Shuiyan Luo here. They used to be the focus of public attention when they were in Yuan school. So, it wasn't difficult for them to find each other. However, they had submerged inside a boundless sea of people after entering the true martial university. Therefore, Yi Shiwen had only been able to find a few acquaintances from the Yuan schools so far. Of course, either she nor Yi Shiwen had seriously tried to find each other. They hadn't been very close friends in the past. They were extremely excited to meet here like this, but they were just going with the flow. Brother, you finished it very fast. It seems that you came across a fairly weak opponent. Shuiyan Luo laughed, and said. She was somewhat surprised in her heart in reality. She didn't expect that she would see Yi Shiwen here. Yi Shiwen had never deliberately tried to find his old friends of the Yuan school. However, that didn't mean that she was ignorant about his matters. After all, his matters were always high profile. It could be said that he had caused huge sensations one after another. Not many people knew about Yi Shiwen at the time he had entered the true martial university. He had garnered a glorious reputation on the ancient road, but it still wasn't enough to make him famous in the true martial university. However, who didn't know his name now? Who wasn't aware of his feats now? She knew much more about him compared to him since he didn't know anything about her. There were several Heaven's Pride experts in the true martial university. However, 3 of them, Yi Shiwen, Hua Menghan, and Qi Fifan, had come from Yuan school. This fact had been suppressed by some people with high ambitions. Else, it would have inevitably shaken the true martial university. After all, the true martial university's disciples had come from various different regions. Yuan school was merely a small place in front of the true martial university. However, it had still produced 3 Heaven's Pride experts. So, this news would have caused a huge uproar. To be continued. Chapter 435. Brother, you finished it very fast. It seems that you came across a fairly weak opponent. Shuiyan Luo laughed, and said Yi Shiwen smiled, but didn't reply. Unleashing was weak? He obviously wasn't weak. He could have easily burst into top 500 experts if he hadn't bumped into Yi Shiwen. However, he had been eliminated in the first round itself. One could say that he had been treated unjustly. I didn't expect to see Sister Shuiyan here, Yi Shiwen said. He looked at Shuiyan Luo. She had also entered the semi-sage realm. However, she was merely at the initial stage of the semi-sage realm. The principles on her body also looked somewhat unstable. This clearly meant that she had recently entered the semi-sage realm. She could be regarded as elite in this generation. However, she couldn't be compared with Qi Fifan and Hua Menghan. These 2 individuals had chanced upon their own respective fortuitous meetings. They couldn't be regarded as ordinary. You've become a very busy man now. It's not surprising that you didn't get the time to look for us. Shuiyan Luo teased Yi Shiwen. She also sighed in her heart. They used to be called the 6 pro-disciples in the past. However, the disparity between them hadn't reduced. It had grown bigger and bigger on the contrary. This was the result of having met with different fortuitous encounters. My bad, my bad. Sister Shuiyan, please forgive me. Yi Shiwen repeatedly asked for forgiveness and said, Oh, by the way, are Sister Shuiyan and Brother Huang are still in touch? He still recalled that man. That man used to as cold as ice. However, he wasn't a bad person. There hadn't been any news about him after he had entered the true martial university. Well, of course, Xueyan Luo replied. Yi Shiwen had started his journey late, so he wasn't in contact with these people. However, these people belonged to the same batch, and had started their journey together. Therefore, they were obviously in touch. So, they knew each other's whereabouts. That's great. I wish to give a dinner party tonight. Let's gather everyone. Consider it to be an apology from me, Yi Shiwen said. This was a rare opportunity for a get-together for all the disciples of the Yiyuan school. This time's martial arts competition wouldn't end in one day. Only 3 rounds would take place today. But the remaining rounds of this competition wouldn't be completed in a single day. It would continue for several days. Yi Shiwen quickly met with a few other senior disciples of Yiyuan school after he followed Xueyan Luo. Some of these disciples had lost in the first round, while some had won. He also saw the man who was still as cold as iceberg, Huang Luochen. Huang Luochen's temperament was entirely different from that of Qi Fifen's. Everyone laughed and talked. It didn't take too long for the first round to end. The second round would begin soon. Yi Shiwen, Xueyan Luo, and Huang Luochen had passed the first round. So they left for their respective competition microcosms. Yi Shiwen took the initiative and entered his microcosm. His opponent hadn't arrived yet. He waited for a while, and his opponent eventually arrived. It was a tall guy of the barbarian race. He was approximately 2 meters tall. He was carrying a big club on his shoulder. It was made up of wolf's tooth. He was a bit surprised to see Yi Shiwen. He grinned and spoke up. You'd better admit defeat without wasting any time. It's still not too late. It won't be good for you if my club were to pound on you, just in case. He was a senior expert of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. He had condensed over 700 Dao principles. Yi Shiwen smiled back. This disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave was somewhat funny. He sounded a bit rude and impolite from his words, but he clearly didn't have any bad intentions. He genuinely wanted to warn Yi Shiwen. And Yi Shiwen developed a good impression of him because of this. Yi Shiwen hadn't anticipated that he would come across 2 peak experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm in the first 2 rounds only. It was either their bad luck, or his. I would like to know whether it will pound on me or not, Yi Shiwen replied with a smile. Let's fight. You southern humans are very troublesome. Here I come. The voice of that Fire Cloud Cave disciple faded away soon enough. An enormous imposing aura emerged out from his body, and swept across. The aura seemed mighty and grandiose. It had a wild touch to it as well. This disciple had already practiced the power techniques of the Fire Cloud Cave to perfection. So, his attack wasn't ordinary like the Fire Cloud's falling sky hand that was used by the ordinary disciples of Fire Cloud Cave. Bang! A loud explosion sound was heard. And that disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave suddenly disappeared. He only left a hole behind in the spot where he stood. He arrived in front of Yi Shiwen the very next instantly. He was a big guy. Only a few people would believe that he possessed such speed after they had looked at his grandiose stature. The club on his shoulder smashed down with unmatched momentum. The trace of a plain and honest smile still lingered on his face. However, Yi Shiwen's blade was far quicker. The blade in his hand immediately erupted. The blade energy swept out, and slashed down in a flash. Bang! The club of that Fire Cloud Cave's disciple instantaneously disintegrated into pieces under the impact of Yi Shiwen's Dao tool. Yi Shiwen's long blade then dropped down towards his head from above. Wait! I admit defeat. I was mistaken. You southerners are very sinister. That disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave became somewhat upset and spoke up. Yi Shiwen felt a little depressed since this barbarian man had called him sinister. This was too simple for him. Could it be that the barbarian people still believed that people with bigger bodies possessed greater strength? True martial university's Yi Shiwen has won this round. Just one move. He had won again in just one move. A peak expert of the semi-sage realm had lost in the hands of Yishiwen once again. He couldn't withstand one move, and was defeated. Yishiwen's victory speed set the moods of several spectators on fire, especially the moods of the disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave. How is this possible? How he can be defeated in the second round? He's an elite disciple of our Fire Cloud Cave. Is this Yishiwen genuinely that powerful? I've heard rumor that he has killed some Heaven's Pride experts in the past. Is it true or false? Many disciples were shocked by this, and they were trying to observe Yishiwen. Many people knew that he was ranked as a Heaven's Pride expert. In fact, many of them knew that he had killed some Heaven's Pride experts in the past. So, they weren't baffled by the fact that he had defeated someone. However, they were left shocked by the fact that he had defeated two powerful opponents one after another, and each with only one move. Those two young men enjoyed good reputations. They were considered as elites in the younger generation. Several people had guessed that they would make it into the list of top 200 experts. However, Yishiwen had defeated them by using only one move. He had defeated them in the same manner. The only difference was that Unleashing had been defeated miserably. But the second opponent had been defeated with some dignity to spare since he hadn't been offensive. These two contenders had come in with high hopes. However, they hadn't thought that they would be eliminated so early in the competition. Even the four lords were in shock. Many high-level experts of every major force were present on the tall platform. They were shocked as well. They had given their undivided attention to the fights of Yishiwen and other Heaven's Pride experts. So, Yishiwen had gained their attention because of his brilliant performances. Yishiwen came out of the competition space after he had defeated that disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. A long time span elapsed before the other disciples began to come out of their venues. The contenders who had made it to the second round were a bit more tyrannical than the ones in the first round. That's because only the disciples who had put on a good show in the first round had made it to the second round. The tall platform was hidden amidst the clouds and mist. 4 grand towers stood tall and upright above the tall platform. 4 godlike figures were seated on the thrones located atop each of those 4 towers. These 4 people wielded the power and authority over the 4 forces. The Supreme Lord of the True Martial University was seated in the middle. He wasn't clearly visible. 3 pinnacle experts with tyrannical auras were seated on his either sides. Their cultivation level was hardly recognizable. One man among them was clad in a purple robe. He carried a sort of extravagance on his person. He was the lord of the Xianyuan Palace Hall. The man seated beside him was clad in a bluish-green robe. The color of his robe was very much similar to that of water. He was the lord of the Muddy Sky Island. And the last one was the lord of the Fire Cloud Cave. He was an old barbarian with a robust physique. His hair was as white as the feathers of a white crane. He possessed a somewhat wild aura. He was seated upright beside the Supreme Lord of the True Martial University. "Is that Yishiwen? I heard that he has killed a Heaven's Pride expert of your Xianyuan Palace Hall. And he also taught a lesson to a young Heaven's Pride expert of yours in the Wind Dragon City. Geez, he's really outstanding." Muddy Sky Island's lord laughed mischievously and said. It was obvious from his tone that he was trying to sow seeds of dissension. "Yes." The lord of the Xianyuan Palace Hall merely replied with a yes, but didn't say anything further. He didn't become happy or get angry after he heard this. It wasn't clear whether he was angry, or had merely treated this as news. The lord of the Muddy Sky Island shot a glance at him. But he didn't elaborate further. Some things don't need to be elaborated further. This youngster is pretty good. His approach towards this competition has been appropriate from the get-go. He treats the competition as competition, nothing more. The Lord of the Fire Cloud Cave unexpectedly opened his mouth at this time, and spoke up. Yishiwen hadn't injured that disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. That's why the Lord was quite pleased with him. Muddy Sky Island's Lord got restless as soon as he heard these words. Yishiwen had recently tidied up his disciple quite miserably in the first round. Therefore, he didn't wish to see Yishiwen. "Humph! This is nothing. It's only the beginning. He won't be able to go far. The lord of the Xianyuan Palace Hall couldn't help but open his mouth and said, "He's not even a chief disciple. He's nothing compared to those hidden geniuses who haven't shown themselves yet. You never know when someone will defeat him." "I don't think so. I think his reputation will flourish, when the time comes." The lord of the Fire Cloud Cave generously applauded Yishiwen. A rampant person like Yishiwen didn't need to be scared of anything. In fact, he himself was an extremely rampant person. So, he was quite impressed to see Yishiwen's no-nonsense style of handling things. He obviously didn't know that Yishiwen was the one who had stolen their flaming sun real water. Otherwise, he wouldn't have spoken such words. Perhaps, he wouldn't have appreciated Yishiwen if he knew this. Rather, he would have stepped off the throne, and would have chased Yishiwen everywhere to kill him. It's too early to say whether he's a genius or mediocre. This kid is arrogant and despotic. Let's see how far he goes in the future. The lord of the Xianyuan Palace Hall spoke up in a somewhat unsatisfied tone. The lord of the Muddy Sky Island looked at the supreme lord of the true Martial University, and noticed that his gaze was fixed in one direction. It hadn't changed one bit from the beginning to end. It seemed as if he had heard nothing. Muddy Sky Island's lord merely sighed, and didn't say anything. To be continued. Chapter 436. Chapter 436. Many powerful enemies. Yishiwen obviously didn't know that these four big personalities were talking about him. But his mood wouldn't have changed even if he knew. He had goals that he must surmount in the future. The second round's results began to spread quickly among the disciples since most of the participants had finished their respective fights. Those Heaven's Pride experts will dominate this time's competition. However, you never know, someone might emerge out as a dark horse. That's difficult though. Those Heaven's Pride experts have been specially groomed by each of the major forces. The resources they obtain from their respective forces are far beyond our imagination. One can only surpass them if their innate talent goes against the heavens' will. Otherwise, it's not possible. Yeah, that's right. It's said that Fire Cloud Cave's Chitian is the most powerful expert this time. Barbarian God's real body is considered invincible in the entire world. He has killed his opponents in one slap in both the rounds so far. His opponents didn't even have the power to fight back. The Fire Cloud Cave has suffered heavy losses in the rounds so far, and they have sent only one Heaven's Pride expert in this competition. However, Chitian has enough strength to suppress the other outstanding heroes. Barbarian God's real body? That's nothing. I think our true Martial University's golden god of war, Yishiwen, is more powerful. Do you think this barbarian god's real body is more powerful than that titan's body? And was he also not killed by Yishiwen in the end? Yes. Our true Martial University's Qin Wang and Han Bingwang have also participated apart from Yishiwen. These two individuals are also very mysterious, but are also quite ruthless. Their opponents didn't even get the time to react while facing their attacks. It can be said that they aren't much slower than Yishiwen in defeating their opponents. Absolutely not. Your true Martial University is merely a frog sitting at the bottom of the well. It can never be a match of our Xianyuan Palace Hall. Our Heaven's Pride experts are outstanding. Our Xianyuan twin stars are widely famous, and are considered unbeatable in the entire world. What Yishiwen? What Qin Wang? They can be easily crushed to death. I spit on you. Your Xianyuan Palace Hall is like a feather. Don't forget that your Heaven's Pride expert, Fan Ming, was killed by our Yishiwen. Moreover, Yishiwen has also taught a good lesson to that child Peng Yangbo. It's been so long, and you still don't know who killed him. What are you so proud of? The news about that fight between Yishiwen and Peng Yangbo in the Wind Dragon City had already spread throughout the true Martial University. It had attracted the attention of countless disciples of the younger generation. They now looked at Yishiwen as their idol. People had only raised their eyebrows when Yishiwen had killed the Titan body. The internal struggles are always far less noticeable than the external ones, regardless of the era. What's more despicable are those Xian Yuan twin star experts of yours. They team up in their fights. Who wouldn't win a fight when it's two against one opponent? I can't bear to see such villainous people. True Martial University's disciples angrily spoke up to defend themselves. What are you quarreling for? There's no match for our East Sea's Emperor Qin and Hai Yao Jin. They are invincible. They are widely popular among the experts of the younger generation in the entire East Sea region. The disciples of the four forces were arguing amongst themselves. However, they weren't able to convince each other. So, they could only stare at one another helplessly. It was impossible for these people to win this time's competition. So, they could only have the expectations from their own schools to win this competition, and suppress the other outstanding heroes. And they were depending on the Heaven's Pride experts for that. Yishiwen was hearing everything quietly. Nobody could spot him in the crowd since he had restrained his breath. The people these disciples had mentioned were strong opponents. These 8 Heaven's Pride experts were the frontrunners in this time's competition. The result would change only if someone could make a sudden rise. Otherwise, the winner would be one among these 8 powerhouses. Yishiwen heard a familiar name, Emperor Qin. He had heard it last on the Demon Island. He was one of the 2 individuals who had left the most profound impression on him. The other individual was Qin Shui. These 2 individuals were undoubtedly the 2 strongest experts among the geniuses who had been summoned to the Demon Island from the 10 countries of the southeast region. Yishiwen had obviously indulged in a fight with him at that time. However, he had soon realized that he wasn't a match for Emperor Qin. Moreover, Emperor Qin had been very hostile towards Yishiwen. And Yishiwen was quite wary of him because of this. In fact, the matter concerning 8th Prince Yuyi's life and death had nearly sparked a major fight between Yishiwen and Emperor Qin at that time. Would there be an extension of that unfinished fight here? Yishiwen was quite wary of Emperor Qin even now. However, he must defeat him, or even kill him in order to win this time's competition. He wouldn't mind killing Emperor Qin if given the opportunity. He knew that Emperor Qin must still be hostile towards him because he had killed the 8th Prince Yui despite the warning from Emperor Qin. Emperor Qin felt that his prestige had suffered a huge damage because of that. Moreover, one could say that such enmity wouldn't change because of change in circumstances for an arrogant person like him. Yishiwen knew that the opposite party wouldn't let go of any the chance to kill him either, if given the opportunity. Yishiwen was also wary of Xian Yuan's twin star experts. He was wary of them because he would have to fight with 2 individuals at the same time. The twin star experts always fought as a team. They represented fire and water properties respectively. Both of them were ranked as Heaven's Pride experts. Therefore, one could imagine the dreadful might of these 2 individuals as a team. They were considered invincible in their region. And their accomplishments weren't just for show either. Yishiwen was especially wary of these 2 individuals. He didn't care about other Heaven's Pride experts since they weren't a matter of concern for him. For example, his gilded tyrant form itself was far superior to the barbarian god's real body of Qi Tian. In fact, Yishiwen's gilded tyrant form had also benefited a lot from the Flaming Sun real water. So, he knew how intrepid the Flaming Sun real water could make a body. This guy wasn't an ordinary person. Yishiwen sighed. The road to winning this competition was full of dangers and obstacles. However, he had no other choice but to attain victory. No matter who among these 8 individuals is stronger or weaker, we aren't a match for any one of them. I hope we can advance for several rounds without coming across them. We can obtain more and more rewards round after round if that happens. Yeah, that's right. The best thing would be to surrender if we bumped into any of them. Otherwise, we might get killed on the spot by these eccentric Heaven's Pride experts. In fact, the slightest delay can be fatal. This competition was incomparably cruel since the hidden objective was to kill the Heaven's Pride experts of the other forces. Hence, one should expect no mercy if they bumped into the Heaven's Pride experts. Yishiwen closed his eyes to regain his composure. Shuyan Luo and the others also came out soon. Shuyan Luo and Huang Luochen had experienced a daunting fight this time, but things had thankfully ended without any mishaps. But more than half of the other disciples of Yi Yuan's school had been eliminated. Yi Shiwen knew that more than half of the remaining disciples of the Yi Yuan school would probably get eliminated in the next round. In fact, Shuyan Luo and Huang Luochen might come across bitter fights in the next round. Fortunately, I didn't encounter a very strong opponent this time. Shuyan Luo patted her bountiful chest and said. She looked somewhat glad. You will sooner or later. Huang Luochen casually spoke up, cold as always. Everyone knew that his disposition was like this only. He was always frank, and didn't care about anything. Can't you hope for something good for me? Shuyan Luo stared coldly at Huang Luochen, and said. I'm only speaking the truth, nothing more. Huang Luochen insipidly replied. You! Shuyan Luo snorted angrily. Are you Yi Shiwen? Yi Shiwen seemed amused as he watched these two people talk. That was when the voices of two individuals sounded from behind him, in unison. These were extremely sinister voices. Yi Shiwen turned around to see. Two young men were approaching him side by side. They looked exactly the same. They had an imposing appearance, the vigor of a dragon, and the ferocity of a tiger. They were walking in sync with one on the left, and the other on the right. The only difference between the two was, the young man on the left had red hair and beard, and the one on the right had aqua blue hair and beard. The unexpected arrival of these two had made Yi Shiwen and other people tense. Aren't they Xian Yuan twin stars? Why are they looking for Yi Shiwen? Are they planning to start the fight ahead of time? Hee hee. We will get to watch good show now. There's a strong feud between Yi Shiwen and Xian Yuan Palace Hall. Fan Ming had been killed by Yi Shiwen. Even a well-known genius like Peng Yangbo, said to appear once in several millennia, had been defeated miserably at the hands of Yi Shiwen. One can only imagine the kind of hatred and desire for revenge they must hold when it comes to Yi Shiwen. Tut tut! Xian Yuan twin stars! Yi Shiwen immediately understood that these two individuals were brothers. The one on the left with red hair and beard must be the older brother, Hu Qi, and the other one was the younger brother, Hualan. Both of them were extremely ferocious. Yi Shiwen, you're pretty good. Even we know your name. You must be very proud of yourself. The older brother Hu Qi opened his mouth and said, We weren't aware of the situation here since we were on an expedition. However, we heard that you are quite the savage after we returned. That trash Fan Ming was killed by you. However, it doesn't matter now. You will soon die at our hands. So, make sure you cherish your remaining days well. Yi Shiwen was speechless. He was baffled by what he had just heard. Who's more savage between me and you two? My savagery is easily dwarfed, and is basically rendered insignificant in front of madmen like you two. I wonder what you'd say if you were to find out that Peng Yangbo was also killed by me. Yi Shiwen obviously wouldn't reveal that. He might end up being chased for the rest of his life if he revealed the secret. This may not have much to do with Peng Yangbo's death, but with the enlightening mind ancient tree. So, Yi Shiwen would never risk revealing this secret. It would be very detrimental since he didn't possess enough strength to fend for himself. I have nothing to say if the entireties of your Xian Yuan Palace Hall's Heaven's Pride experts are planning to die at my hands. Yi Shiwen coldly replied. These Twin Stars experts were truly powerful. The most important aspect was that they would always attack as a team, regardless of the situation. It wasn't known what price had been paid to make the major forces permit the participation of these two brothers as a team. Your razor-sharp mouth can't save your life, Hualan coldly said. Wash your neck properly, okay? The future of the true martial world is in the hands of us Twin Stars. Only we are the absolute, whereas everyone else in the world is as transient as a fleeting cloud. Well, look at you two making empty promises so blatantly. I just hope you are a bit stronger than Fan Ming and Peng Yangbo at the very least. Yi Shiwen continued to speak in an indifferent manner. We will soon find out who's the one to talk big. You won't be living for long. So, cherish these last days of your life properly. Twin Stars experts spoke up in unison. Then, they turned around and left. They had a haughty attitude. They had simply looked down on Yishuan. It could be said that he was already a dead person in their eyes. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see a fight right here. Even the domineering personalities like Xian Yuan Twin Stars and Yishuan didn't dare to start a fight in private. Of course. That's a given. Several great sage experts are overseeing this competition. The disciples can't possibly dare to break the rules and regulations. Yishuan didn't get time to think much since the third round started soon. He grasped the token and entered the designated competition space. To be continued. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.